we
don't
saw,
I
we
don't
saw.
remember the generating system,
There's one big one where it goes
Right.
but I was told there was one right there.
Okay.
Did you see that one?
Meat market
No,
was
I
right
don't
next
know.
to
Did you,
that.
Yep,
is that one of the ones you saw?
Yeah,
Okay.
We used to run a locker there when we
yep,
butchered.
yep,
So actually,
yep. They
Well,
had
and the
nice
other
meat.
problem is, if
some
you
of
wanna
your-
listen to it in the
lot of local
radio, the
Mason-
Lansing area
need some explanation,
broadcast
because I
is
couldn't
not,
follow.
Okay.
it's not a
Most
strong
of them
signal,
do the
so
population
like, we're
projections,
like,
The
I
sliding
think right
scale
at
and
the
times 10.
edge,
and-
so some,
I didn't follow that
like, it
at all.
depends on the time of
How we
day,
doing for time?
whether
Go
I'll
ahead,
be
John.
able to pick
Whenever
it
you're
up on the
ready.
radio.
Oh, you're up?
Yep.
Clearly or not, I guess you could
Okay.
stream the radio broadcast.
6 o'clock, I'm gonna call the meeting of order for the Bath Planning
frustrating.
Commission. Dates March 11th, 1925. Approval of the agenda, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to
Or
approve the
changes?
agenda.
Thank you, George. Any
Support.
second? Thank you. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes. Anyone have a disclosure of interest conflict on the agenda? Nope. Anybody have any public comments they want to make about any items that are on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Minutes of February 11th. Has everyone read the minutes and reviewed them? Any changes to the minutes?
I move to accept the minutes as written.
Thank you, George. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mark. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on. Communications, Miles.
No communications at this time.
Okay. Let's move on to old business, the Main Street fourplex. Miles,
Yeah.
give us an update.
Yeah, so, just to give everybody context, cause I think there has been some change since this first came before the planning commission. Obviously, this project, let me get to it here, has been under review for kinda some time now. This actually first came to you guys, we just looked it up a little bit, it was introduced to planning commission a little bit under a year ago. Since then, there's been a number of agency reviews that have come forth that, caused the developer and the agency to have to sidebar before we got to the point where we felt like the project was ready to be brought back to the planning commission. Thankfully, from some diligent work from the developer, they were able to work through those agency hurdles, creating the impetus to bring it back before this body tonight. In terms of the land use, we're looking at a fourplex, which is a multifamily residential, and the D high density development district, and the Main Street area of Bath, also referred to sometimes as the quote unquote village area, or the quote unquote downtown area of Bath. There is some unique features to the site, which I can pull up, that are a little bit interesting. So we have some on-street parking, which I think it sounds like one of the commissioners have some comments about. There's some drainage mitigation that the developer and the drain commission are in talks with. There is some specialty, well requirements that the developer and that agency are in talks about. Other than that though, it's a pretty standard fourplex. Pretty common land use to be seen these days. These are becoming more common, in my industry as the cost of construction has been increasing and demand for housing has stayed high. So, it's kinda what I got, John. I don't know if the commissioners have any questions for me or the developer.
Anyone have any questions?
Last thing I'll say, I believe the developer also brought a material and sampling board tonight. If, probably, since they're making the effort, I would say, probably a good idea to take a look at that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Am I wrong in remembering that it was 8 before? Okay, maybe I missed a meeting.
Nope,
Where
you're
that changed?
wrong,
No? Okay.
or you're right, I'm sorry,
Oh.
I'm wrong, I should have talked about that. That is one of the changes that has been made due, in part to gain compliance from some of these agencies that was alluding to. The project was scaled back in order to keep it moving. So there was 2 parcels, there was gonna be a fourplex on each parcel to keep the dwelling unit, on each parcel low, in terms of unit count, and now one of those parcels had been moved for like a phase two.
Okay,
So still something possibly to come in the future, but for the purposes of tonight, we're looking at one parcel, 4 units alone, that's it.
and there was a weird little landlocked parcel back there too, did anything happen with
That
that?
is on, yep, that is on this northern parcel where the second phase is still projected to be. This kind of square you'll see here is what's referred to commonly as a no man's land parcel. No one has ownership.
Somebody must own it. Aren't they paying taxes on it?
There is no taxes paid on it, there's no record of anybody owning it. There's a,
Interesting.
there's probably about 20 of these in the township, they've been getting cleaned up over time, but, they exist.
Former roads,
A lot of former roads will be in there sometimes, usually this is a larger one, usually it's like a strip of land like 5 feet by 10 feet.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and just, there's no documentation to say who owns it.
that's former railroad, right? The track ran through that.
It did, it ran through that area, so just kind of probably, even when the railroad was established, or maybe there was a lot of easements over it, but no clear sign of ownership. There are weird parcels that exist out there.
So when you get cases like this, no, it doesn't so much, because it's, but the strips and thing, if the adjacent property owner wanted to get title to that, how do they, is there a process?
Yes, there is a
to get it?
process to do that, and that's something that we've even spoken to the developer about, just cause we would, on our end, like this to get cleaned up, and there's not that much
Right.
quote-unquote free land in existence these days. But you can petition the circuit court if you're an adjacent landowner, and, no man's land parcel can be deeded to an adjacent owner if they go through the petition process. Which is what the owner of, I believe it's actually the property that would be to the south did for a no man's land area that existed there. They petitioned it and now they have ownership of it. Same size, just opposite property line.
Wasn't that where the elevator was?
I do not know.
I think it's where the elevator met the tracks there, yeah.
I think you're right, George. I'm not sure though.
For some reason, I remember the parking being in the back. Was that,
That is one of the changes that were made, is moving to on-street parking. And we'll talk more, it sounds like, about on-street parking. I know, Commissioner Severie has some comments about it and, some dimensional things that he looked at. Kinda in talks with the road commission and standing with best planning practices, I guess our view, or my view, is, you know, Commissioner Severie and me were also talking just before the meeting about this as well. Obviously, Bath Township has a comprehensive plan, but similar to like Park Lake, it's been discussed over time to maybe do a corridor study there, or a small area study, or a small area plan for Main Street, what's the vision down there? In lieu of having any kind of overarching vision accessible, our thinking in talks with the road commission and some other agencies and staff was, there's on-street parking, and let me pull up Fetch real quick. There's on-street parking on Main Street already, and that kinda helps add to, I guess, the aesthetic that individuals might be associating with a Main Street environment. When you drive down quote-unquote Main Street anywhere, America, you're gonna have some amount of on-street parking. Since a new development was coming in, and now this parcel's been redivided, so this now looks like this. But, just hasn't been updated on Fetch. The impetus was, okay, well, we're having a new structure come in here, in order to maintain uniformity of the corridor, wouldn't it be nice to, put some on-street parking in front? That would allow the developer to meet our minimum parking standards, and that would allow the aesthetics of the Main Street to kind of continue down the corridor. So that was the thought process around the on-street parking.
And if I remember correctly, any work on the sidewalk was postponed with the understanding that this project was happening, so
Yep.
no need to
Yeah.
do and then redo
Yeah,
sidewalks.
And with the, because we were using local dollars to do that, we had that flexibility. We didn't want to spend $5,000 to do that section of sidewalk, just to have a bulldozer
Right.
take it out.
That makes sense.
But we've been working with the developer, and there is some money set aside, for that area, so once they do their thing, we can time out our thing, if that's how it all goes down. Obviously, if the development doesn't go down over time, you know, it doesn't preclude us from yet still implementing our sidewalk goals.
Is that parking gonna be specific to the residents, or just like first come, first serve? I know it's not a high demand parking area currently, but
It's not a high
thinking
demand
about
parking
going
area.
forward.
The developer is gonna be on the hook to establish the parking, so in talks with the road commission, we were balancing out. The road commission's going to allow it within the road right away, they're fine with it, there will have to be agreement struck between the developer and the road commission, a contract will have to be drafted. But, they are gonna be on the hook to maintain it, so,
Wait, just clarify my understanding, my reading was that the road commission said it would be our responsibility to maintain it.
they're saying they won't, what they're saying is, we're not gonna maintain it. So then they're saying, if you guys wanna establish the parking, you can maintain it, but the township's view is, we're also not gonna maintain it. If the developer wants to use the parking as part of their count, we'll get an agreement with them that they'll maintain it over time,
The developer.
the developer. So, by that logic, that agreement would also say, like, these are their parking spots.
Are the other spots, parking spots in downtown or on main streets, developer maintained?
They are not developer maintained.
So now we have a duality, right? So we have some that are developer maintained and others that are not.
The problem in lies with, and me and the road commission discussed this. So like, how those are paid for over time and how they are plowed over time is one of those Bath Township things that
That we're trying to move away from,
we're trying to
right?
move away from.
Right.
So that's why in this case, a contract will be in place. However, the legacy parking spots that were established in lieu of clear responsibility being drafted in the lead, that's
I think it's,
Something
that would
that
be
was
something that would be
done
good for us to
incorrectly.
see, is that the contract language.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily I guess my recommendation would be, you know, we have staff, we have legal counsel, we can get a contract that says how we're gonna maintain a parking spots. The purview of this body is to look at the overall land use and how the site functions and determine if it's appropriate or not in that location.
Yeah, for this location, for snow removal, your contract's almost gonna have to require them to remove the snow. You can't leave it on the street, because if you leave it there, it's either gonna block the sidewalk or it's gonna push the cars back into the road, when they park there.
They just push it over to the township spots.
Yeah, we would not appreciate that. But yeah, the contract would obviously, maintenance would have to spell out how snow is
Yeah.
treated.
So, now does the county plow the parking that's there now?
They do, but they do it under no obligation to do so.
No. And it's
there's
very
no-
sporadic.
It's sporadic, because it's it's low on their totem pole, but
Yeah.
if the plows are available and they have time and the cars aren't parked in their way, they'll do it.
So Miles, going back to your question about, you know, what's within the purview of the planning commission versus, you know, future land use. My sense is that we're not comfortable with this as in alignment with our future land use, and so if we were to consider this, I would imagine that, you know, looking at that contract language to alleviate our fears of future headaches of the township in terms of whose responsibility it is for maintaining, you know, those parking spaces would be of utility for us to consider.
I guess I would say that this is a by right land use, and it's a fourplex in a high density development district. In most other municipalities, this would be a development that would be administratively evaluated when we come before planning commission. In Bath Township, more things come to the planning commission, and then in turn, even more things come to the board. If the planning commission determines that they don't like the on-street parking aspect of that, and that's something that, as a whole, this body decides is inappropriate, then I would say that would create impetus for the developer to go back to the drawing board on where they put parking. But if the planning commission determines as a whole tonight that they do find on-street parking acceptable, then they could leave it to staff to administrate a contract on how that would be maintained over the years. So it's still up to the planning commission whether they find that acceptable or not. That's what the developer would like to do, that's what the road commission's okay with, but it's your determination on how you would like to see parking treated here.
I think the long-range thing is, from my perspective, we need to look at what do we want this, whether it's downtown or whatever, what do we want this to look like in 20 years? If we, study we're gonna look at later here, this complex we're in right now, is kind of a mishmash because there was no master planning done for it, so now it's a mess. I don't want the same thing to happen here, where we put little pieces in now and then as we develop this whole area through here, which it will get developed sometime, I don't know when, sometime. It'd be nice to have some kind of a idea of what we'd like to have this look like. Now, if you wanna have on-street parking on the whole thing, we can do that. We have to move the street to the east somewhat, because to put that part, now that the street's moved to the east some already. You can't put angle parking on the other side. You get parallel parking.
Yeah, there, and right now, that's the
Yeah.
function,
And of course, the other problem is if our parking requirements say you have to have 8 parking spaces here, you
Yep.
can't get 8 parking spaces at angle in this 100-feet space.
yeah.
I went and looked at the parking dimensions, our engineering book and stuff, and later actually drew a scale drawing of it. If you put 8 spaces in there and stay within the 100 feet, you've got 4.5 feet left at the end, which isn't, you sure can't get a dump truck in here.
Yeah, and that's what you did point out before the meeting, so Mr. Estruth, I don't know if that's something that maybe you're gonna have to talk to your engineer about, but it also looks like, Ray, that we do have some space to shift those to the south, if we
You
need to
could.
gain up a couple additional feet. Cause again,
But
this
that-
isn't the
then that- but
developer's,
then- Yeah,
this isn't the developer's property, I mean, it's the road
No.
right of way, right? So it's the road commission is, already finds these spots acceptable, shifting them a couple feet.
So the road commission actually doesn't find them accessible, they absolve themselves of any responsibility, so let's be clear about that. The other part is that there's no other part of the township that has this type of on-street parking. And so this is a relic of a time period that has long since passed. And so going to Ray's comment about future land use, I think that it's a really important consideration. I mean, the resistance to, us, being a part of reviewing and thinking about the maintenance of it, I'm uncomfortable with on-street parking. It's incredibly ambiguous, it doesn't align with anything else within the township, and it seems like it's a future headache for township staff, to manage.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, George.
This is not like why does it not fit in with that area? What I'm
Well,
hearing,
what other part of the township has on-street
I'm
parking
not talking
other
about the
than
parking, I'm
100
talking about the development itself. Is that not coherent with the rest of the downtown?
The development?
Yeah,
I was talking about the parking.
okay.
no, I think the development for downtown is
Developments.
fine. The other thing, if you could put parking behind the building, then you could actually put four parallel parking spaces in front for visitors when they're gonna come visit. But if these 8 spaces are for the people who are living here, and each one of them have 2 cars, if you got somebody who's gonna come visit, they gotta park someplace.
Is there some reason why there's not parking in the back anymore?
Yeah, we talked about, there's a trade-off, right? So the more impervious surface you put on a
Lot.
a development, the more you increase or decrease infiltration for drainage. So there's already drainage concerns, I guess we'll say, in this area. So the on-street parking helped alleviate drainage concerns by switching the parking. It's doable and it would meet zoning, but then you would have to have additional,
Drainage issue.
probably, French drains or something, some engineering option, which, again, drives up the cost of construction.
That's even with the 4
And I'll
cars.
just say, the whole reason that on-street parking was discussed in the first place is I agree with, Commissioner Almaridge's comments, you don't see this anywhere in the township, other than on this street,
Right,
which it's right adjacent to.
yeah.
So I think it'd be one thing if we were like, oh yeah, like, let's do that over here on Walnut, yeah, it wouldn't make much sense, but we're not talking about Walnut, we're talking about Main Street.
I think it fits in with what's already there, even though, I mean, other than the contractual thing. Used to be, that street, when I was a kid, was angled both ways, and that's where they turned around. Cars would go down, and right there where that
Yeah.
lot is, and that railroad, and that
Yeah.
metal shop,
Yeah,
that's where
they
they turn
make
around
E-way.
and come back up the street. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no U-turn sign or nothing, they didn't go to the end, they didn't go to that other building, they turned around right there and they went back up the street. And both sides of the street were angled towards the north.
So, I mean, going to, I think Chair Reich made a comment about the maintenance of the current spaces, that it's spotty, right?
Right.
And that's something that we want to avoid, right?
Yes, I
Because,
would be nice.
you know, residents will have complaints, it creates a headache, who do they call? They call the township, why is the road not maintained? Why is the parking spaces not maintained? You know, who has responsibility of that? You know, this is about, you know, future planning, not about, you know, can we make it look like what it currently is?
I think when they call in, they have complaints now, they know who it belongs to and what to do about it, no matter what it is in the township. Right?
Well, what's the answer? I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Well, when they call in, they'll know, I mean, I'm
Like,
sure the people,
you're
after
shit
the,
out of luck, it's on you?
no, after the people call a couple of times, like if, let's say this is not maintained by the developer. If someone calls in and complains about it, the township, after the first call, or the people in the office, even right now, where we had no man's land down there, by Hawk Hollow, they knew who was responsible for it, and they were able to address it. And they would be able to, because they're gonna know the developer's on the hook for this, and they tell the people it's the developer's issue, and we have ordinances to keep your sidewalks clean. I would assume that would be part of the agreement, that they're responsible for it, and if not, they have so many 24 hours or whatever time it is to get it cleaned up, and if not, they get cited for
They
it.
would get some.
When was
And
the
if
last
they
time you
don't-
did a citation for snow removal?
So,
It will start, pretty soon.
you can talk to Ally here, who's been sending hundreds of letters recently about snow removal.
Okay.
So, we're working on it. We know that Bath Township has historically been lacking enforcement, and that's something that, myself and my staff take I would say large issue with. It's something that we also I've been asking help from the community to advocate for more enforcement of the township standards. It's something that I think there's been a lack of responsibility in this community for, that has oftentimes even been at not the current board, but previous boards have even obfuscated. Enforcement has gone all the way up to the board level, and then the board has collapsed and said, oh, we're fine with this.
I'm gonna go a slightly different. Trash removal, are we gonna have bins that come out to the street?
They have on their site plan, they call it a dumpster space here.
How are they gonna get to it?
There's a drive here. It's not well shown, but it's shown there. But I believe, Mr. Escher, is that correct? Were you thinking about, cause you call out a dumpster, but I can't remember.
Dumpster with a fenced-in area around the dumpster,
Okay,
and we'll have a limestone drive back to it
yep.
that, basically will be just used by the trash company at this time.
Yeah, and you're not gonna allow stacking on there, cause you want the dumpster to be able to move in and out.
Right,
But I think in your phase two, you'll have to come back, if phase two does proceed, you would have to come back and amend that, cause your future plan is to utilize that drive, correct?
correct.
Okay,
You know, and our whole concept was kind of designed around the parking in front to make it look more like it was part of the city in the downtown area. And so the townhouse look, the two-story front, close to the sidewalk, kind of so it's living in the front of the house, type thing. Yeah, you can see from the look that it's made to look more like an urban area. with, and it'll just have the sidewalk across in front of it, which will have a curb built into the sidewalk. City's paying for the sidewalk, but we're paying for all the parking space in the front. That would be our responsibility, and we'd also be paying for the curb on the sidewalk. And we'd be making a sidewalk, what is the sidewalk you guys have there now?
We do a 5-foot width.
5 foot width, yeah, so we'd have the 5 foot plus the curb, the width of the curb in that space area.
So I think the township engineer had mentioned something about sidewalk width going from, what was it, 6 to
Yeah.
5 or 5,
Yeah.
6 to
Yeah.
4?
Yeah, I think maybe from 4 to 5.
4 to 5.
4 to 5,
The plans say 5 now.
5 is ADA compliant.
okay.
But if the cars
If
come
there's sidewalks on both
in,
sides, right?
the
Yeah.
overhang will shrink that, correct?
That's why you can see the alignment of the sidewalk has been moved slightly, and a part of our, recommended conditions is gaining an easement for, I think it's about a foot over the property line for us to maintain that sidewalk with the developer.
Okay.
So is the sidewalk right on the property line or a foot away from the property line?
It's right on the property line, but we
yeah.
want about a foot, you know, just in case.
The
Now, if
new,
you move it a foot, that's gonna move
Oh, wait a
the
minute.
parking out.
Well, it moves the parking deeper into, that way we can get the parking tight and create, you know, keep the parking in line with the current parking that's on Main Street.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at, was mentioned the overhang of the cars when they come in at an angle parking like that. If there's not something to stop them, they'll overhang the sidewalk by a
Oh,
foot
there'll
and
be,
a half.
yeah, and that, we see that right now, there'll be the curb there, but you see that right now on Main Street.
Oh, yeah, even with the curb, if they come up to the curb, the car's gonna overhang it.
Oh, yeah.
Unless they got a low car. They run into the curb.
Can we request like a post be put up in front of that? Or
Um,
something to kinda inhibit that from?
There are ways to do it, I guess all those ways come with pros and cons,
Yeah.
right? Cause then they make maintenance over time harder.
Yeah, if you got bumpers in it, then snow plowing.
Then snow plowing's
Yeah.
hard, so it's like, yeah, you save yourself maybe the overhang, but then you make plowing difficult. So,
I mean, you could kinda, if we made the sidewalk wider, so that when the cars did overhang it, you still have 5 feet left, then you have to say part of the sidewalk is designated as part of the parking space, to get you a 20-foot long parking space. And I can't,
Move the whole thing back, wouldn't you?
No,
Because
I-
otherwise, if you move it out towards the road, wouldn't it kick your butt out?
well, no, if, like, right now, if you get the parking space in there like that, if you assume those parking spaces are gonna are stopped at the sidewalk,
Right?
there's an overhang from the front wheel to the end of the vehicle of something, a foot and a half or something like that,
Right.
or what it would be.
Yeah,
Make the sidewalk a foot and a half wider, so when they come in there, they're gonna hit the curb with the tire.
you
Right.
still have
The
your
sidewalk will
5
still be
foot.
5 feet wide.
Yeah. Or a green space between the curb and the sidewalk.
No, not that small. You don't want a
You
foot and a
want
half.
2 or
cars.
3 feet.
yeah, cause I would just
Green
die.
No.
Yeah, or 6
If you-
feet
if
of
you
green
get- yeah, if you
space.
get-
You
That's
don't
the
have
problem
that
they-
much space.
Well, that's the problem they got on Michigan
that
Avenue when they did the redesign. I don't know,
that workable?
what was, has anybody looked at that? They
Again,
got
there's
the,
pros and cons.
the bike lane, they got the sidewalk, the curb, and the traffic lanes. There's no place to put the snow.
No.
So they put the snow up on the sidewalk,
I-
then they cite the property owner because they didn't clear their sidewalk.
Yeah, I haven't driven down Michigan Avenue since they finished that. I haven't figured out yet what they're trying to do on Michigan Avenue. It's a mess, my opinion.
Yeah, but going with a 6-foot wide sidewalk, something that I think we could look at. Right, cause that kinda that solves your problem, that would be the easiest solve. Every other solve comes with cons.
So, another question I have is, I mean, looking through the agency reviews, it seemed like there's a lot of deficiencies in terms of this is pretty far from a complete application. And so, and it didn't sound like in your report that that was the case. But things like landscaping, I forget some of the other elements that at least the township engineer pointed out. You know, I'm just wondering if this is a bit premature for us to really consider and make a decision on. I mean, you know, we're spending all this time on on-street parking when some more details would make for a much more productive conversation.
Well, the landscaping's complete, so, again, this was an extremely long review process. So we got the initial review from the township engineer, and then as agencies made comments, changes were made to the plan, but, you know, we conducted our plan. You can see the street trees that are proposed here, you can see the current landscaping, or the current, I'll just say, plant life that exists as shown here to be removed. So,
Well, I mean, help me with my understanding, so, you know, with the elements that are missing from, say, the township engineer, I mean, do you not send those in for a reanalysis with the township engineer?
we don't always.
Okay,
We don't always, but again, a part of our recommended conditions, cause I do feel sensitive to how these things develop over time, is, let me flip here, is that the township engineer shall review and approve the submitted construction plans. A part of the construction plans is the civil set. So basically, this allows, and this is a typical way to review developments, is to let all the agencies get their initial stab at it, basically. Get a staff report together, make sure that all of our conditions are being met, and then have those agencies get a second stab at the civil plans where we can figure out these finite details that need to be worked out and not litigate them as a part of the zoning review process, which again is through the prism of land use policy. You know, what's the land use, how's the overall site function, does the planning commission find that acceptable? If they find it acceptable, just not as a bad thing, but just generally speaking, then the impetus should be, especially with the development that's a by right land use, should be to approve the site plan. If they don't find it acceptable, you know, you just have to be very particular about what you're not finding acceptable.
but that's where we would need the details, right?
The details of what aspect.
The site plan of the parking, if it's,
Water mitigation, I mean,
Well,
lots
so
of different things.
water mitigation again is, and we try to put as much information as we can in here for you guys. But again, the drain commission will ultimately hold those standards. If water mitigation can't be met on the site, the developer won't be able to comply with drain commission standards, there is no development. Regardless of what you guys choose to do here
We're
tonight.
showing on the site the use of, rain gardens, I think it's right on that site plan. That we're, doing a rain garden area actually off the south end and then to the back of the property.
A lot of these things are the same things we see on every site plan. Or I mean, every plan, you know, the okay of the drain commission, okay of the road
But
commission.
having done this for years, I mean, there are multiple ways of addressing, you know, a single problem, right? And some of those fit within, you know, you know, our expectations for our communities, and some of them don't. And so it's good for us to sometimes see those details to ensure that there's good fit. That's my only point with all this. And so with the on-street parking, just as a case in point, you know, there's, you know, I don't think we're clear as to whether, you know, some of us feel that this is a good fit, but then the maintenance of it seems not like a good fit, or the ambiguity of the maintenance seems like it's not a good fit. And then there's the question of like, you know, future land use, what do we wanna see in our community? And so, you know, sometimes these details do make a difference, and it's good for us to see those. That's the only point that I'm trying to make with this.
Yeah, I would just say that how the process, me and Howie were discussing this before, I mean, how the process plays out in Bath Township is far more thorough, especially for something of this caliber than what's typical. So, I feel like a lot of that information, we are trying to bring as much to the table as possible. There has been many eyes on this, over a year of eyes have been on this project before we got to this point tonight. Again, the parking is, you're 100% justified in viewing the parking however you want to view it. Myself, the road commission feel like this can be executed in a proper way and maintain the minimum standards of parking.
I got a question. So on the parking, if they go to the south more and take up more of the road, which there's no parking there right now, they're still on the hook for that maintenance
They
of
would be
that?
on the hook for whatever parking they establish
Whatever, however
that meets
many
their
feet that
development
is to be-
standards. In terms of where the parking's placement, it would be a minor amendment to the site plan, but again, something that we could do administratively, because at the end of the day, all this parking's not located on their parcel, it's the road commission's property.
So can we, make sure that the snow conditions are included?
That would have to be a part of
The
the
road.
maintenance plan.
Just a point of clarification, Main Street isn't actually County Road Commission property, that's Bath Township property.
Is, no.
So I've
that's
looked
not
into
cor-
that.
That's not correct,
Previous-
it's road commission property.
Yeah, any public street is road commission property, at least in the township.
In the township. Now, if you, like, in DeWitt City, they own their roads, but in DeWitt Township, the road commission owns their roads.
Right. Correct.
So I'm working off of information from prior conversations, and it doesn't sound as ridiculous as it sounds, but in some planning around Bath Days, there was a question about doing burnouts down Main Street. And then there was a conversation with, Mark Trotter about what would be allowed. And, you know, my information's directly from Mark Trotter that they didn't care because that was Bath Township, maintained road. Now, I'm not gonna doubt you, I mean,
Yeah.
it's.
I wonder
The
if-
information that is out there as to who controls what or who maintains what is not at all clear.
Where I could see the confusion being is if the burnouts occurred within this asphalt area here, he is correct that technically that is not road commission maintained, right? It's ambigu, can't say that word, it's of who maintains, who maintains that, so I could see that, but as far as the actual road section of Main Street itself, that is road commission owned, maintained, and operated.
They're doing burnouts in bathtubs? That's gonna
Well,
be pretty.
so this is about getting Bath Days up and running again. This is around the pandemic, and so the classic car group,
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
wanted to
That makes sense.
get involved, and that was one of the promotional elements
Yeah.
that they were excited about. And so
Yeah.
some of us spent a little bit of time looking into
Yeah,
it
I also.
unproductively.
I guess I would also say, just thinking about, some of this. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that, you know, what's the vision for Bath? I think the board is talking about this a lot lately. However, I'm also sympathetic to, you gotta understand the developer is trying to meet the standards as they're written right now today. Like, you can't, in this circumstance, especially with a by right land use, but even with a special use permit, it's tenuous to hold them accountable for like some future idea of like individual's vision of the township. Like, you need to assess this development based upon what are the conditions of today, right now.
Let me push back on that. I mean, because I think there's a dialogue here. And so, 6 years ago, I mean, for those of us who've been on the planning commission, you know, we saw much more complete plans that we make decisions upon. There's been a movement towards making approvals with a long list of conditions. And so sometime, I think part of my fear is that that creates circumstances where things are approved administratively that don't align with the commission's thoughts about what's ideal for our community. You know, the road, I mean, the on-street parking is one of those things. And, you know, looking at maintenance agreements, because, I mean, this is not the first conversation we've had about maintenance agreements related to roads and roads right-of-ways. And so, to the developer, I'm in favor of approving this, but there's a little bit of history that's getting wrapped up in this, in terms of, you know, what's presented to the planning commission, what is the information that the planning commission is making decisions upon. And so, my feel, and maybe just speaking for myself, is that, you know, it's important for us to see a little bit more detail, so that we can make informed decisions. And so, you know, that's my thought on this particular thing. And so, there's history that's impacting a local developer, that, you know, I think we as a commission should have, you know, some clear conversations about.
Are you looking for action on this today?
Yeah, by this township's ordinance, this is a complete application. Now, if the parking, again, we don't like the on-street, or when I say we, I mean this body, not myself. If this body doesn't appreciate the on-street parking aspect of the site plan, it would be within their right to require that off-street parking be established by the developer. If this body does like the format of the on-street parking, then staff will execute that will.
You take this drawing and slide it a little bit further to the right. Now, which parcel, this is the one, okay, it's the one with the blue line, that, okay. Now, to move the parking south to make it fit there, there's a driveway right there.
It's not, I mean, that,
I mean,
it's not a
But it's
driveway.
access to that property. Now, I don't know who owns that property.
We do.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
township
that's,
property.
Yeah.
used to be DDA property.
You couldn't, we wouldn't be able to legally say that's a driveway though. There's
No,
never been a
no.
driveway established
No, I was
there.
just thinking that if we let the parking on the street come further south, that's blocking off access, that corner, that access to that property. There's already parking in front of it, so there'd be continuous parking down through there, so.
Yeah, if we ever wanted to establish access to
Yeah,
this
they-
property, I don't think we're precluding ourselves from doing
There
that. We
used
have a
to-
lot of autonomy of what we can do in front of that parcel.
There used to be a drive that went back to that, because that building right there has a garage door in the bottom, being the northwest corner, there's a garage door there, or used to be, I don't know if it's still there or not, but. So they used to drive through there to get into that
Well, you can
garage,
see
but they
the
don't own
tracks, I mean,
prop-
people are driving through.
But they don't
yeah.
own the property.
Yeah, and
to
do
get
they have
there.
an easement to that? Not that I'm aware.
No, no, they don't.
That doesn't mean that people don't drive over things
Right.
Right,
in reality,
I see them at the meetings.
so,
You go back to the site plan, right there.
yeah.
I have a question on your sewer. It shows the 6-inch sewer going right down the middle of between the street and the building. There's gonna be a separate lead going in each one of those units, I assume?
Yes,
No, it only shows one on the ice, okay. And that line will extend further north into your proposed phase 2?
This line here,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah,
we would be building a sewer line that could attach units on the lot to the north
Yeah.
if that ended up coming about. I mean, if we end up building those at some point, either a 2-unit, a single family, or a 4-unit, whatever was built there, there would be enough sewer there to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd have to cut into the street, disturb the street, and put the sewer in the street.
and this was at request from SCUMA too. They like this
They
alignment,
preferred it going into that parcel.
yeah.
With 4 leads.
Well, just the sewer here being aligned in this fashion,
Yeah.
instead of going into the street, that they preferred that. It's a little bit messy how the sewer is in this area of the township.
So that sewer lead going through there would be a public sewer?
It would be,
Oh,
and we'd
yeah.
have to gain all easements related to it.
Is that in our proposals? Or- I must have overlooked it.
Yeah.
Oh, deeds. Or is it
SCUMA's
sidewalk?
been heavily involved speaking with the Astros about this.
Now, the well is gonna be where?
In the back.
That is shown here on this page, right
Oh,
there.
way back there, okay.
So a little bit of a long service line, but the health department's been sticky about this point, so.
Yeah, well, get away from what contamination used to be there.
And there's some special requirements that they have to meet, so there's studies that had to be performed, which,
Yeah,
part
the
of the
other-
year-long review.
The other comment I've got is the temporary, or, it doesn't say temporary, the gravel or crushed asphalt drive back to that temporary dumpster. I think we need to make that clear, that's strictly a temporary surface for that. We don't want that to be, I mean, whatever they do to the north of that, that should become a paved drive back to that dumpster.
Yeah, and I would say that, if that northern, because it's hard to always evaluate something on an if, right? But if that comes back, they would have to make an amendment to this site plan, at which time you could require that.
Yeah.
Is the area behind it just a shared green space
Yeah.
It's just green
behind the
space.
building? Is it
green
just
space.
shared
Yep.
use from the tenants?
I don't know what the,
Yeah, it would be all shared use. Our original plan, if you recall, we came in with a plan and we were doing, storage buildings back behind. And we've taken the storage buildings off the plan, and partially because the amount of roof space of the storage buildings presented more water on the site and, just made it easier to meet the water restriction, situation on it. We also at one time had planned on putting the parking in the back, but the idea, the whole design of this was to make it look more like a downtown area, to kind of try to improve the downtown area and, make it seem more like a downtown, so the parking, we moved the parking from the back to the front, changed the look of the building, and, so we've kind of built it around that idea.
How many phases are there to this?
8.
So will there be additional buildings on this particular parcel?
not proposed right now, as the developer just said, they removed the storage. The next phase, right, which you could call phase two, but it wouldn't be a phase, because at this point, how the land division is divided up, it's separate. But another 4 units could be proposed here in the future, which is, they're just laying out the
So that
infrastructure
would be
to allow
phase
that.
2 of 8 phases, you said?
No, he said 8, there's 2 phases.
2 phase, okay.
Yeah.
So there won't be additional structures built on,
Nothing's proposed at this time. If an additional structure was to be proposed, again, they would have to come back and amend, and you'd get
Yeah.
your chance to evaluate it at that time. Cause it would be a major site plan amendment.
Well, I think you had the right idea with your first proposal, to make it look like a downtown area. But
Has anybody given any consideration to taking that DDA property and making it into a public parking lot?
That's a great idea.
I don't know.
That's a great idea. That's a problem.
Because
downtown.
parking is an issue down there, and if they ever do open that little bar and restaurant, it's gonna be a bigger issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect conversation for us to have, one, when we do our comprehensive plan, and two, when the board's executing their strategic plan. Is downtown parking a goal for the board?
It just seems to me as though we're creating some issues here with the existing on-street parking and who's liable for the snow removal and the maintenance of the road, and we're creating a kind of a two-tier enforcement that's, I've got a problem with. I really think it's discriminatory.
Do you see any way around it, though?
yeah, put the parking in the back.
I don't know that you're gonna get it if they've got water issues today, and we're talking about putting in parking lot, which means runoff. Where's the water gonna go?
Yep.
And the drain commissioner is saying, not in his world.
That's the thing, if you put parking in the back, you'll meet our zoning standards, and they'll get the zoning approval just to have the project die at agency review.
Yeah, because of the drain run commissioner.
Well, I move to move this project forward with the added conditions, with the sidewalk, 6 foot instead of 5. And
moved
with
up-
the-
And moved away from the property line by a foot,
Pardon me?
and moved away from the property line by a foot.
And moved away from the property line by a foot. Also, the temporary service to the dumpster made clear that it's temporary service to the dumpster. Is there anything else I'm missing besides
The parking layout's gotta move some to get it to fit, and still get access to that driveway. back
that
into
has
the
to do
dumpster.
with them meeting the Clinton County Road Commission standards.
And
So
our
that's,
parking
that's covered under that. And then the drainage is covered under the county drain.
Right.
I'm just a little worried about the snow removal thing, whether, to make sure that the county makes sure that's covered, but hopefully I can make a call and remind them of that. I'm sure they do it every day, so I feel pretty comfortable with that.
again, you talk about the
Oh, wait a minute.
pathway
Wait a
back
minute,
to the
Mark.
trash.
We've got a motion
Oh,
on the floor.
motion,
Is-
well, we need a second.
Yeah, do we have a second to support George's motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Is everybody clear that,
Well,
One last question.
Discussion.
yeah,
We've had discussion about that pad being the access point for trash. George just talked about it
Yeah.
not being long-term.
great.
Not,
So
No, he
that's
just
a
said,
conflict to me.
let me clarify, what
The
Commissioner,
construction.
what Vice Chair Baker is saying is that they clarify that the temporary nature of the surface of it, if they're ever going to come back and try to use that as a full drive, to be established upon site plan amendment, that it would be a paved drive.
Okay.
That's my understanding. Is that your
yes,
intent?
that is completely right.
Alright,
but I guess the question is, how long can temporary be?
That's true.
I think there needs to be a window, a sunset point.
do you wanna amend your motion to clarify
That it always,
this as currently proposed, that surface type, if any changes are made to the site, shall change, be reevaluated as part of the site plan review?
absolutely.
Do you support that, Mark?
It was Kate.
That was
It's
Kate.
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought-
What does that,
Do you
what's that do for
support
us?
that, Kate?
yeah,
What that clarification does for us is it's gonna be crushed limestone in perpetuity until, amendment is made to the site.
My comment is that we have 7 members who have 7 different ideas as to what this is gonna look like. I think it's irresponsible for us to make a decision without having more clear information.
What it's gonna look like as far
The
as,
whole thing.
well,
I would say it's gonna look like this. It's gonna look like how it's on the plan right here.
Looks like it. yeah.
supposed
So if we
to,
went, all of us independently described what the parking situation is gonna look like, do you think you'd get 7 identical answers?
There's 8 spots. We're gonna have to work with the township engineer to determine if the spots need to be shifted south to meet US standard parking dimensions. If it needs to be shifted south, we'll do so, and we're gonna establish a maintenance agreement with the developer for
And-
what they are responsible for, not
and
the
the Clinton
corridor as
County
a
Road
whole.
Commission. And the
Our,
Clinton,
our
no,
requirement.
Has nothing to do with the Clinton County Road
Okay.
Commission.
But our requirement is it has to be 2 spaces per unit, correct? So it's gotta be 8 spaces, 8 parking spaces.
8 parking spaces total. They'll have to meet that. If they can't meet that, then it will die administratively.
So are these parking spaces gonna be marked for residents only, or?
I think
mean,
at part-
I can see if, like you mentioned and others have mentioned, if there's more development,
I think
most
direct,
people going to a restaurant might park in these spots, and then the residents may not be able to park there.
directional signage would probably be a good idea here. That's something that we can
Well-
get in our agreement.
should that be added to my,
It should be. I would recommend that.
yes, could you add to my, motion to add signage for parking
Yep.
after the
Signs could say
agreement?
permit parking only, and every resident has to have a permit.
That'd be the easiest way to do it.
It would be. But then they gotta have a contract with a towing company to tow them.
That's correct.
They need for enforcement.
is that your intention? That the parking would be for residents only?
It has to be,
It
right,
has to
because
be.
they're,
I mean, we
Required.
certainly would live with that. I mean, we're putting the parking in, we're paying for it, but we're not, our goal was not to say no one else can park there. I mean,
The only
I
problem is
think
gonna
that
be
there's
is,
gonna be 2 cars per unit, maybe not. I mean,
Yeah, you never know,
but we've
though.
got a plan on 2 cars a unit,
Yeah.
so,
Yep.
I
we
think-
designed it with 2 cars per unit that way.
Directional signage, I think, would be sufficient. Many businesses operate in that
Yeah.
manner.
Yeah, they do.
only times the problem is when I leave for work in the morning, come home at night, there's no place for me to park in front of my house.
we discussed that the last time too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a problem in some areas. Yep, it's true.
It's the trade-off for living in the downtown Bath. Right across from the bar.
Yep, that's an issue. Very big issue. Anybody else got any discussion?
Can we,
Can we get the motion read again, please?
There's a lot of notes to it, but Vice Chair Baker moved to vote on the development upon satisfaction of the conditions brought forth by the planning commission. Commissioner Hagerman seconded the motion. So the conditions were that the trash driveway be made clear, extended sidewalks to 6 feet. The parking maybe have to shift south to meet the US parking requirements and establish a contract with the developer for the maintenance of these parking spaces, and to add signage for parking.
directional signage?
Is there any other notes?
And the drive would be surfaced.
Has everybody got any questions, further questions?
Is it too late to take a look at the board, the stuff they brought with them?
No?
Planning Commission's purview.
Yeah,
Can we take a look at that before we vote?
absolutely, sure.
Looks nice.
And John, or Chair Reich, sorry,
That's
the last
fine.
thing I guess I just have to say again, it's important for any planner in this position before a vote like this to say, you know, again, this is a by right land use. So if this body feels that zoning has been met, it's important that they vote in the affirmative. As opposed to a special use permit where this body has wide latitude to vote however they choose.
So in a, what you're saying then, if zoning requirements are met, a developer, not this one, because he's got something pretty good here, but a developer can put pretty much anything he wants to as long as he meets the zoning requirements.
That's correct.
So that's the problem we get into down on Chandler Road with those apartments down there.
Those would be a special use permit though, so it's different.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, we've got design standards, and these, the building itself, you know, as far as I'm concerned, meets the design standards. But if
But-
they didn't, we couldn't say anything about it?
No, because this township doesn't have form-based code where those
Right.
design standards are codified into code. They're best practices.
So that's something else we need to look at in the future.
So, didn't we have something in there that said it needed to be, fit in with the environment that it's in, right?
Well, always, whenever you're looking at zoning, one of the things that you look at, and this can get a little subjective, but I think it's intentional, is does it quote-unquote conform with the character of the area?
So it being pink necessarily, or whatever color that might be obnoxious to somebody.
If something was to be like hot pink, and this body determines that it doesn't quote conform with the character of the area, that would be something where I think it would be defensible in court, as long as if a denial is issued, it's clearly stated that is the reason why the denial is being issued. It's important to clearly say that when you're issuing a denial of something that meets all other aspects of zoning for a by right use.
So as far as zoning is concerned, they're required to have 8 parking spaces.
Yes. If they cannot, like, if those spaces shift and they can't meet that, it administratively dies, it won't meet the conditions.
But
of
my question
approval.
is, the township is providing that parking, not the developer, because it's on the street.
It's on the street, so the road commission is providing the area for it, but the
Does that mean-
township is facilitating the agreement.
Does that meet the zoning requirements then? I mean, to me, if a development's gotta provide parking, they gotta provide parking on their property, not on township, not on the street right or anything like that. And that, to me, is a problem.
Yep, that is the trade-off that's being established here for the on-street parking, and if the denial was issued tonight and it is parking related, that needs to be clear that that was the reason it was denied.
And then if they, let's say put 2 spaces in the back, or they still could even tomorrow, that has to come before us again?
If it is denied tonight after this vote, because of parking reasons, the developer would be able to amend their plan and come back before this body, of course.
I'm feeling as if we have to make a decision of yes, per the information that you're providing. But I'm not feeling that that's actually the case.
I don't
I
think
feel
so.
like we need more time, and I think we need more details.
I think he can say we vote no if the reason we're voting no is because of the parking.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well,
yes, you could.
the question would be if we say, yes, township today, because we own that property, could extend it. But if we were to sell that property, you're basically saying needs an easement to move that space over in front of our, that property, to meet his 2 spaces per. Because we don't know that we're going to retain that property in the future. So,
I think what you're saying is by shifting parking, maybe let's say 4 feet to the south, are we establishing a future conflict with the frontage of the property we own? I'm comfortable
That's a
that,
good-
I'm comfortable that we're not, because we, in our, relationship with the road commission, have autonomy there to establish a drive as we so see fit in the future. There's no, we're not on the hook to maintain those 4 parking spots there in front of that parcel.
okay.
That was gonna be my question to you. Can you pull up that fetch image again?
It's also important to take a vote based upon the conditions of this site, not adjoining sites.
Yeah,
I understand that.
yeah.
The conditions of
But
that
it-
site are insufficient, right, which is why we're considering parking spaces in front of township-owned land.
I mean,
So-
I
Are we
wouldn't say,
sure that
I
they're
wouldn't say they're
insufficient? I mean,
insufficient,
the
8 parking
road
spots are
commission has
provided.
approved it.
Yeah,
The road commission has not approved anything, they've absolved themselves of any,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Consideration of
Liability
this.
and consideration.
I got a question. Can them spots be moved north? Seeing it's the same owner?
it could also move north.
It's the same owner, yeah.
I
Yeah,
would
but
think-
the
Except that
problem,
he has a
the
driveway.
problem is it conflicts with their driveway, is, right? South is the easier option, north would require more pavement, right? So south is easier, I think. Because you have a drive that needs to be maintained here for dumpster pickup.
Okay,
Yeah.
So if they were already tight here, then you'd have to almost skip that and add like 1 spot here and it would just be hanging out, which is doable, but it's easier to move 4 feet this way.
but if we move 4 feet to the south, then let's say I know that we're not supposed to consider this, but I am gonna
It's
have,
okay.
just like you have to
It's,
consider what's in
it's
your
okay
brain.
to theorize about the future.
Yeah.
So, we do have, and I don't mean to go off on a rabbit trail, so I'm gonna make this really quick. We do have a parking issue in downtown Bath. If that area is gonna be developed, if you go to any of them establishments right now, and there's any event, even Bath days, it's hard to park down there. If that was a parking lot per se, I don't know. Obviously, we don't have lots of money to spend on making parking lots. But if that did, I wouldn't wanna impede on our future access to that lot. Or if they sold it, future access to that lot.
I guess what I'm saying is I'm comfortable that you're not, because we have no obligation to maintain 1, 2, 3, and then this vacant spot area here. We have no obligation to maintain those. If the township wanted to come and establish a drive here, they could. If the township wanted to establish a drive here, they could. We could establish a drive anywhere along this frontage.
That's correct.
if the township wanted to sell the property, we would be limited because of that frontage limitation.
I think if we sold the property, they could, again, establish a drive, they would have to move some parking, we'd have to work with them on moving parking, which is what we're talking about right now, is parking.
Correct.
Because the issue here is this is private parking on a public right of way. If it was public parking, there wouldn't be an issue of what we're encroaching on and,
That is correct. You're,
which is private.
You're
You'd have to
utilizing-
move this stuff probably about 10 feet south, not 4. I mean, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll work with the township engineer, and again, if that's determined that it can't be done, then it would have to come back or die administratively.
If it wasn't able to work and they could do it north, it would still go through though, right?
If they did it north, I would say, now, if we're getting too much outside the bounds
Yeah,
of the
that's
site,
kinda-
you could argue that now we're getting into the territory of major site plan amendment.
Okay.
And then it would have to come back.
Yeah,
Either way, it would come back.
Yeah, I think so. If it's not a minor amendment, it's, a shift that's minor, then you need to be reevaluated. I wouldn't feel comfortable making that decision administratively.
thank you. Is there any further discussion?
One
Go ahead.
question, clarification, so the waste removal with the dumpster is temporary, what's the long-term?
I think we clarified that.
Question.
So the surface of the dumpster, which is crushed limestone, you said,
Limestone, yes.
will be in perpetuity until phase two or the property to the north is, proposed, at which case the surface will change at that time. That was our clarification to that
And they
condition.
would they have to re-amend their site plan for that?
Though, yeah, they'll have to come back and they'll actually have to do two things. So the property to the north is its own parcel. So they'll have to come back and do this process for the property to the north and then at the same time amend the property to the south. If you can remember, that's similar to what we did for Ace Hardware, where we were reviewing Ace Hardware, but also amending Monticello's site plan amendment.
Yep,
So they could-
Because we were linking a drive similar to
Yeah.
what could potentially happen here in the future.
An agreement had to be.
An
drafted for
agreement
that.
had to be established for
I guess
that.
I'm still not clear, is the dumpster going to remain
A dumpster will remain there in perpetuity
even after
until,
the other lots?
no, once the other one comes,
Okay.
if
If it ever
big,
comes.
if it ever comes, it could never come. If it comes
Basically,
out to
the
be
plan is to have a
reevaluated,
dumpster there for the residents.
yes.
So are they gonna have individual trash cans too, or?
I think that, what, I asked that and it
just
sounds
throw
like,
bags in there, I guess?
it sounds like they'll be throwing bags in the
The
dumpster.
dumpster was going there so we wouldn't have to have individual trash cans
Okay.
in front of each unit that get dragged out to the street and
That was
back.
kinda where I was
The
going.
dumpster is for the tenants,
Yeah,
not for any other purpose.
not for public use. Yeah,
And if we did build on the units, the space to the north, we'd probably just increase the size of the dumpster in that area and the fencing around the dumpster.
anything else? Is everybody comfortable to vote?
Even if it's no.
I'll call for the question. Roll call,
Yeah, you wanna do a roll call?
absolutely.
Alright, sounds good. Let me get my little list here. Alright. Vice Chair Baker,
Yes,
Commissioner Crainer,
Yes,
Chair Wright,
No,
Trustee Hagerman,
Yes,
Commissioner Severie,
No,
Commissioner Almarigi,
No.
Commissioner Cutler, or Coulter, sorry. I don't know why I read it like that.
That's all right. Yes,
Alright. So it's a 4-3 opinion, so
passes,
motion carries.
yeah.
Alright,
The parking was the issue for me.
yep.
yeah, I gathered that. I assume all the no votes is all parking related.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll make sure we note that in the minutes. I do wanna, say that, I appreciate the developer moving through this process. I know it's been a long year, and I know there's a lot of stuff that played out that necessarily wasn't even discussed tonight, or, there was a lot of hoops for this one from the agencies that you guys were able to work through, so. Congratulations, and hopefully, another thing that wasn't discussed tonight was there was a MISTA grant in play to help,
Yeah, I saw that.
revitalize areas like Main Street and Bath. So the developer was able to secure that grant, and, this will help them execute that grant.
because
been a long process.
Like you say, we'd like to, we're anxious to get started soon, and hopefully we'll, be able to fit in down there and bring some new vitality to downtown Bath.
different.
I just want to point out that my no vote was not a vote not in favor of the development. It was more procedural, so.
Yeah. No, I like your design and stuff, I think it looks nice.
Yeah, I thought the
Building and
design
stuff,
was
yeah,
great.
it looks good. I think we gotta get more development in that area so we can warrant having the downtown signs on the street, which are still there.
I agree.
Or else take them down, wouldn't they?
I agree, and I hope, Commissioner Severie, that as a part of our comp plan process, we'll be able to talk about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's certainly my plan. All right, well, let's move on. The next issue is the senior center report. Miles, you want to give us an intro? Thank you for coming, Mr. Estrud.
Yeah, so staff, myself, the interns were able to do quite a bit of work over the last couple week period. We were doing this right up to the deadline here. We did find a couple of typos, so we're aware that there's a couple things. It sounds like even one was a kind of a critical extra zero on a number. So our bad there. We'll fix those before this, comes either back here to the planning commission or any other body. We're always a day short, it seems like, when we're trying to get this stuff into the packet. But we do nonetheless, I hope you guys, see we put a lot of work into this and we felt like this was a good product for the team of myself and 2 interns, one of which left us in our time of need and went to Italy, so not to call that intern out, but no, she helped a lot with the data on the front end. I also wanna say that whenever you're doing data stuff, as all you guys are aware, and particularly, Commissioner Almarigi, I think there's always a different way you could do it, a different way it could be viewed, so we just tried to be clear about how we did it and really break down our methodology, because we're not saying like, this is the end-all be-all way of viewing whatever aspect of this project. We're saying this is how we viewed it. I'm sure there are people far smarter than me that could put something together that, viewed it in a different way or a superior method.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
So just for the other commissioners, I did some analyses last time, but I had nothing to do with this. But what I wanna say is, I just wanna make that clear, but this is some of the finest work that I've seen, come out of the township, and this is a phenomenal report, and so kudos to the planning staff on the effort and their work, with this. I didn't notice the typos, because I was so focused on just how well put together this report was.
Yeah,
So congratulations on an awesome job.
Yeah, thanks, that means a lot, for sure.
Yeah, I thought the content was great. I overlooked the other things, didn't notice them.
Yeah, and there's a lot of text here, so there's bound to be, when we're typing this much, there's bound to be a couple of things.
It looked to me like that the autocorrect thing did a few things to you too.
Yeah, and then I even noticed, when we combine this from a Word document to a PDF, sometimes you get format, like it overlapped here. And I didn't notice until I looked at the pack earlier today and I was just like, whatever. But yeah, it came along, I'll go through some of this and then I guess kick it back just to a high level. I'll quickly try to jet through some of this. This was an interesting map, so this is using the emergency contact data that the seniors provide when they visit the center. The methodology here was finding a geography small enough to dissolve the points, that way we're not infringing on privacy rights, but also large enough, a scale large enough to dissolve, but small enough to still see where people are coming from. It was interesting to see the spread. There were even some outliers that we felt like were, almost too far outside of what's typical. So we cut our radius at 18-mile area, but we had even like one point was in like the city of Saginaw. We're like, okay, that's a clear outlier. Somebody came to visit, somebody,
yeah,
they're not coming to the center on a regular basis. So we did try to make some assumptions, that skewed in favor of the argument that it's serving local people. Even with those assumptions made though, we got an ultimate breakdown. According to the emergency contact data of 53.1% Bath residents, 46.9% non-Bath residents. I spoke about in here how, what that data doesn't show us though is frequency of use. So, yeah, that's kind of a fault in that data set of where it falls flat. It was interesting seeing the, high counts and low counts of meals. Obviously Meatloaf is just killing it. So I guess, you know, you gotta try it. Swiss steak did quite well as well. Yeah, so it was interesting to see what people's preferences were. We shared some of this data with, the senior center staff that does the meals to see, hey, you guys are seeing some of this? Maybe you should look at, you know, our breakdown here on how to plan for meals in the future. It turns out they actually do look at a lot of this though already, so it seems like they're pretty sensitive to what people are liking and what they're not liking.
Does it
Moving-
end up, sorry, I guess I'm just thinking ahead, does it end up actually costing us more to have popular meals? I mean, are we then serving more subsidized meals?
Yes,
Well,
yes.
that's a question that we might ask Judy. What's the food cost per meal?
Beg your pardon?
The food cost per meal?
The cost per meal is $5 if you live in.
No. What does it cost to make the meal?
I'll get into
Oh,
that.
that's
I'll
in-
get-
that's
I'll
in
get
there.
into
It's in the
Yeah,
report.
it's $5 for 55 plus and it's $6 for 55 and under is the cost right now. But I'll get to that, I'll try to stay on order here. One cool thing about this report is that, we're able to use camera data from the new camera system. The DPW ran this through with me. They can draw a line anywhere on the campus and then, count either vehicular traffic or pedestrian traffic as it crosses the line. It's not perfect, I tried to lay that out, for example, like a woman carrying a purse, if the purse is swaying, that sway motion might trip it like 4 times. So what this helps us get a sense of is not exact numbers of how many out, how many in, but overall trends of when it's busy, when it's not busy. We refer to this as, the spiking effect on meal days. People will probably be familiar with, obviously, we all went through COVID, the term flatten the curve is a term that we kinda co-opted in here, where if you're having a lot of people come in at one time and then leave within 30 minutes of that, that's a high spike. If you're trying to level off parking usage, you know, you would wanna look for ways to flatten the curve, so to speak. You can see on the Tuesdays and Thursdays when
Can you zoom that up a little bit
yeah,
for us?
sorry about that. You can see on Tuesdays and Thursdays where card playing takes place, the curve, so to speak, is flatter, you know, it's a more even distribution, we're not having as much, there's still spiking, of course, but it's not to the degree that we're having during the meal days. So this would be a Monday, this is a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that was kinda interesting to see in some real-time data, it's anecdotally what I think everyone understood to be the case, but it's good to validate that. Ally helped us out with the population projections. This is something that planners always have a lot of fun with, population projections. There's basically like 20 common methods that planners use to project population. Ally went with the one that they're currently using at MSU, so it's kind of a cool project. She can break that down if people have questions related to how she did that, cause it is complex and there's nuances and some planners prefer other methods. So again, that's one of those data-driven things where you can make a case that one way is superior to another.
Can you slide down just a little bit? Down.
Up,
Oh, yeah. You got a typo here, I think. You got 2,000 in there 3 times on the first.
oh yeah, I'm seeing that. Yep, that was one that we saw, and what's going on there.
Now that, your analysis for this thing here, I couldn't follow that at all.
You wanna break it down for
Like
them a
the
little bit, Ally?
analysis itself, or like the methodology behind
The
it?
methodology.
Okay, so like for 2030, for example, we pulled census data from 2000, 2010, 2020 of the total population of the township, and then people over 55 and in the different age cohorts. So in order to calculate what it would be in 2030, instead of just simply using like how the growth rate, I should say, of Bath Township over the past 30 years or whatever it is. You go through and you weight each population from the census tracts. So I weighted 2022, since it was the most recent data, I weighted that as 5, and then I weighted the 2010 data as 3, and then the 2000 data as 2. And then you just factor those all together and divide them in order to get more accurate representation of what the population might look like in 2030.
That's where the 10 came from, 2
yeah.
plus 3, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so kind of an interest, and it's great, these are great projects for the interns too,
Oh, yeah.
because it gets to put in practice some of the stuff
Yep.
they're learning in school, and that wasn't a method I was familiar with either, so then I get to learn something from Ally, which is always great too.
So just one comment, what would be helpful here is to have the actual values, associated with each of those dots. And then, for me, it would have been helpful to, here's the gap, between current, in terms of, over 55 versus under 55, and then here's the gap. Cause what I'm seeing in that graph is that the senior population, 55, is fairly level, right? Between now and 2050, whereas the younger population is continuing to grow at what appears to be a linear pace. And so I think the takeaway there is that, we're not anticipating a big spike in senior populations moving forward, so we'll have some stability there.
Yeah, and your exact takeaway was our exact takeaway, which is like, really, if you're seeing, like, from a policy and maker standpoint, whenever you're looking at these projections, if you're seeing a large share of your population becoming seniors, then we gotta plan for this.
Yeah.
Now, if you're seeing a large segment of that population not become seniors, they're getting a smaller share as time goes on, you need to plan for that as well. What we're seeing here is it being steady, which basically means like hold constant. It's a priority, seniors are a priority as they always are in every community. And what this is saying is, they're not gonna become more of a priority in the future. The priority that they hold now is the priority they'll hold in 2050.
Back a little bit earlier in this report, an assumption you made on the carpool rate of 1.5 people per vehicle, which may be accurate, but that number, if it's higher or lower than that, can really impact the number of parking spaces you need,
100%.
so.
And I think we're getting into conditions of parking here, so I'll talk about that real quick. I think what we are seeing, when it comes to current parking conditions, and we segmented this off, and we even looked at what our ordinance would call for a land use. There's no land use in our ordinance of senior center. There's
No.
dine-in restaurants,
Correct.
there's, recreation centers. So we thought those were at least close in nature to this land use. And by our own ordinance, it's insufficient parking in this area. So, and I think, again, the whole impetus for this is, there's insufficient parking. So, what this analysis does is confirm, yeah, we concur, parking is insufficient. We looked at how the utilization of the campus works. One of our large takeaways and recommendations here was we evaluated where parking could go and the pros and cons of establishing that parking. I mean, surprise to no one, the con is expensive, and the pro is if you were to do the expense, you would gain more parking. Whether it's worth it to do that or not is not a decision that I can make, that's more something maybe the board wants to look at. But really, one of our large takeaways was, just like the township, this is a great microcosm of what's going on in Bath overall, which is this place's population has grown fast and things have developed quickly. And like we were just talking about, in terms of the impetus to have a large conversation about what our zoning looks like and future land use looks like and some small area studies, the campus is the same way. The fire station got developed out of need, and then the DPW moved and expanded out of need, and the senior center grew out of need, and the thought to how the campus all interrelates and works with each other wasn't thought about at the time. Maybe like we can say when we're Monday morning quarterbacking like it should have been, but they kind of just built this place as they needed to over time. And that was the consensus of, obviously I haven't been in Bath a super long time, but I talked to, you know, our assessor who's worked here for 25 years, DPW that's worked here for a while, and you know, some other members of the community that have helped build some of these structures, and like, hey, did you guys talk about how the cell tower would kind of box you in? And they were like, no, we didn't talk about it, but that's where the cell tower went.
Yep.
So, yeah, so one of our big recommendations is as a part of the strategic plan, maybe a spin-off of that plan is a campus study. You know, analyzing the campus and seeing how this whole thing interrelates, and then coming up with priority actionable steps of like, okay, in year 1, we should look at this, in year 10, we should look at this, and move towards a more efficient campus. Cause our finding was the campus it's not sufficient.
It's not sufficient for the senior center, but not sufficient for DPW.
It's not sufficient for
admin.
anybody, yeah, it's not sufficient for the office, yeah, so, yeah, correct, it's not sufficient for the senior center, but, you know, it developed over time. Okay, now getting into the cost analysis, which breaks down some of your question again.
Before we go there, just
Yeah.
to comment on your population stuff, on the second page of that, it's just a statement that kind of caught my eye. It says here,
Okay,
you can see from the graph that the projection suggests continued population growth with a notable increase in overall residents aged 55 and older.
there is, it's no.
But that statement there kind of conflicts with the rest of the analysis, where it says the population is gonna go up.
I guess maybe we could have chose our words a little bit better, but all we're saying is 55 will increase. It's
Yes.
notable that they will increase. It would be,
Okay.
I think it is notable, yeah, because if it was straight up the same, anything's notable, if the population.
When I see notable increase, to me, that means it's gonna be a jump in it.
It's gonna be a good jump, okay. we
The
could-
noticed slight increase.
There's an increase, we noticed an increase.
Yeah, cause the rest kind of made sense with the data, but that one statement kind of stuck out at me.
Yeah, it looks like a conflict.
No, just, okay, cost analysis, so, again, there are 1,000 ways how you could think about cost analysis, so this is just my big disclaimer here, that this is one way we thought about it. Commissioner Severie, I'll get with you on the math, cause I wanna make sure we'll clean up whatever mess in this report, I can get with you offline about that. But, our large thinking was that, our large picture thinking was that we would take not just the senior center budget, because that's one line item, right, so that 190K and some change, that is the budget of the senior center, but there's also, you gotta think about the other departments that service the senior center. So what did they contribute to the overall, the term we coined was operation of the senior center, and that dollar amount came out to be 203K and some change. And so then we took their revenue that they bring in from other sources that are not the serving of meals, which by far, in terms of programming, is by far, bar none, their most popular program. We subtracted the other revenue sources from the overall operation expense, and then we said, okay, well, this is how much money's left over, these are how many meals were served in 2024. Take the number of meals, divide the operation cost remaining from the amount of meals served. And if this was a nonprofit organization that wasn't affiliated with the township government subsidizing it, what would that dollar amount for the meal have to be for them to keep their lights on? You know, a break-even dollar amount.
Yes.
And the dollar amount we came up with was $17.19.
Now, in that, got a question about the calculation
Yeah,
on that. You got the 2003 minus the 50,000, I don't know where the 50,284 came from, where that number comes from.
yep, that 50,284 is their revenue,
Total revenue?
total revenue right there. And we're minusing the meal cost from that revenue to figure out what the non-meal revenue looked like.
Okay, well, that,
So that's like-
47,815 is the meal revenue, not
That's
the.
a meal revenue. So that number, this number here is the figuring out non-meal revenue. We're taking non-meal revenue and minusing it from operation costs. And then whatever's left over, we're dividing by the number of meals served in 2024, which was 11,685.
Okay, the total cost for operating the senior center is 203,000,
Correct.
everything.
Yes.
Now, subtracting from that what? The revenue that came in?
Total revenue,
Total revenue.
subtracting the food cost revenue.
The food cost revenue.
Why do you subtract that out?
Because we needed to understand, but what we didn't wanna do is just take total operating costs divided by meals. That would've gave you a meal cost of like $19 per meal. But they do have other revenue streams, so like when they rent to do the cards, that's another revenue stream. We wanted to make sure we captured that revenue before we divided out the meal.
Whiteboard.
But I'm still confused by the 50,284
Yep.
is revenue?
That's full revenue, yep.
Okay.
Minus meal revenue.
Including the meal, does that 50,000 include the meal
It
revenue?
includes the meal revenue.
Okay, that's where I,
In my world, in food service, you would take the food cost divided by the number of people. That's your food cost per meal. Then you would take the labor that is directly attributed to production of the meal and do that as a labor cost per meal. So that now you have that, and then a fraction of the custodial, electricity, whatever, if you wish to do that, to get the expense, and that becomes the cost of providing that meal.
I think
The
that's
way
what-
you've done it
Well,
skews that.
I don't know, I would have to see how that numbers
Yeah.
break down. I know, again, I think there's 1,000 ways, you've
Yeah.
got far more experience in this area than we do, for sure.
so I think that's what they attempted, but I think there's an element missing here, and that's a proportion of, what you're getting at. You have staff time, operation time, not 100% of that time is devoted to meals, right? It could be 75% of that time and operational costs are devoted to meals, whereas that other 25% are devoted to euchre, the other services that are provided.
That's correct.
And so, the way I would approach it is to look at the revenue generated, and it's not a perfect measure, and say, all right, what proportion of total revenue generated is, food, revenue? And that would be, I mean, I'm looking at it, it's probably close to 92% or something
Yeah,
like that.
something like
And
that.
so, then I would say 92% of all the operational expenses could then be allocated towards food. So-
Yeah, no, that's a great point, that's a good way to look at it, and I guess when we did talk about that a little bit in our methodology of why we looked at food as a way to project break-even costs, and we justified our methodology by saying, we felt like it was more, if in a world where the senior center, which we're not advocating for this, by the way, but if in a world where the senior center operated in more of like a business pattern, when you're operating a business, you don't want to go after, when you're bringing in revenue streams, you have your heavy sellers and your low sellers. If you're trying to make a stopgap of revenue, you need to double down on what's selling. You don't start charging more for what's not selling to try to make up revenue. And in the senior center's case, what's not selling is cards. What is selling is meals. So we said, oh, if revenue's gonna be gained anywhere, it won't be from cards. If you charge more for cards, people just won't play cards. However, if you charge more for meals, people will still come for meals. Those are assumptions we're making.
Not bad assumptions, that's how I worked it my entire career, but it was trying to find what that direct cost of doing that, so that you understand, because Judy invited me, so I was at a meal, and so their food cost per meal is probably in the $2.50 per meal. And the labor cost is probably in the same range. But again, that takes it down to $5. And no, they're not breaking even
No,
on the
you're
price
moving-
point. And in particular, the cost for the when I saw that 50% split, I'm going, that dollar is just not cut for the non-bath.
Residential.
Well, I just wanna clarify that non-bath residents are also paying $5.
Well, the non-bath are paying $6.
No, they're paying
They're
$5.
five.
They're paying sign.
It's an age,
55 and
Based
older.
on
Not
age.
location.
Right,
at one point in time, it was based on residency,
Yeah,
Yes.
but it
you're right.
switched
Yes.
to age.
yes.
Okay.
And so I just wanna say, again, we're not advocating for like the dollar amount to somehow become $17.19. We don't think we've dialed it in to do that. This is giving us an idea of what the market rate for a meal could look like and allowing policymakers to have
Yeah.
an idea of, alright, okay, so we're subsidizing this approximately by $13 a meal or whatever, right? That I would say,
And
Even
that's
by-
where I would argue that point, you have senior citizen programs that are costing $17. Okay, the program is per person. But the meals, which is a singular program, is not being totally subsidized to that level. And that needs to be looked at in a segregated point.
I think that's fair.
Because playing the cards, use of the facility for other things, those are programs that I believe the board needs to identify that they're willing to subsidize that. But let's look at this program of meals to determine how far they want to go.
Miles, do we have the data to be able to make the calculation that Mark's talked
And I'll
about?
be
yeah, I think
more
we
than glad
could
to come
probably
up and
work,
sit down with you.
we could probably work
Yeah.
with Mark to get those numbers, that'd be great.
It'd
So-
be nice to do a comparison.
But I guess, I mean, just pushing back a little bit, so you're separating out the programming, which meal programming is a program, you're
Yes.
separating that out from the food costs. And I think,
No, the food programming is food, the labor costs
facilities,
for that time.
yeah,
But we've got people that are running a program that are devoting time to cards, to other things for seniors to do, that we're now sticking into.
so I think the intent was to
was
factor
blended.
that out.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at that, what proportion of senior center programming is dedicated to the meal service?
Yeah.
And that would be, I mean, I don't know where to get that question. One is to look at revenue generation, that's probably pretty iffy. I mean, you could,
There's gonna be pros and cons, you're right.
Yeah, there
You can
are.
always do it by hours of use. In other words, the meal preparation on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're there for maybe 4 hours each day or something like that, so that's 12 hours for the week. How many hours is the senior center open for cards and everything else? You can
That's,
split it-
there are
split it
a
up that
lot
way.
of ways that we could dial this down. I'm willing to work more in the future, dial this down. The point of this is again, to give an idea.
And believe me, I think it's a very good report.
Yeah.
And it shows that there's value here that is not,
but can we just linger on that value a second? This is the first time I've ever seen any sort of estimate of this ever developed in Bath Township's history. So I just wanna say, this is monumental work, even though it needs to be
Yeah.
refined.
Oh, yeah.
This is huge for us in terms of, you know, making planning decisions, so congratulations on that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, moving on to parking, so how we had it laid out, and we did try to follow our original rubric that, Jason helped us develop, and then this body gave us feedback on. In that original rubric for, steps of analysis, it said community value of parking. We tried to think about that pretty hard, and we felt like it was almost impossible for us to find, like, what is the community value of a space? Just to dial it down to some number, which I think this is an imperfect way of thinking about it. We tried to just take it by two methods, one by the overall revenue divided by parking spaces and what we're calling typical senior center parking spaces, which you can go back to this, and that's the green spaces. Where obviously on meal days, seniors are parking here, they're they're parking where they can park, cause that's how they have to do it. But for purposes of our analysis, we had to make some assumptions to do math. But let me get back to it here, sorry. We tried to look at the revenue, so again, that 50,000 number divided by parking spaces, so what does the value that each space brings per year based upon revenue look like? That gave us one number, and then we looked at it by what is overall operating costs, that 203K number, and then divide that by spaces, so what does that value look like? It's hard to put a value on what parking brings the community, those were our two methods. We put in this image to give people that didn't know a basic understanding of what parking dimensions look like. Probably not perfectly called out, but that also comes back when you're thinking about where you can expand, you need to understand how big a parking space is. Cause again, this report's for you guys, but it's also for the layperson, and at least in my experience, whenever I ask people that don't look at this all day, how large they think a parking spot is, I could just go ask anybody that never looked, they'll always estimate way under what it actually is. Most people would say like, oh, it's like 6 foot by 12 foot, and it's not even close, you know?
My 7-foot car won't fit.
Yeah. Okay, when it comes to summary and recommendations, we try to do our best just to quickly summarize. If you didn't read any of the report, this would break it down for you. And then we tried to make recommendations within the section we're summarizing, so different sections led to slightly different recommendations. But kind of the through line for it is that there are insufficient facilities for the current use tempo, and so thinking about in lieu of making costly, I'm not saying that costly, improvements should be off the table, but costly improvements obviously take money, and then two, take time, so there's lower hanging fruit in terms of like policy, things that could, or local policy that could be put in place to either incentivize behavior, curb behavior. Just for example, some things we were thinking about was, in terms of like the flatten the curb section, we're like, okay, well, we're getting these spikes because lunch is served for 1 hour, so of course everyone's like in a rush to sit down, so they can be in a rush to eat, so they can be in a rush to leave. If maybe we even just expanded lunch to 2 hours, could we flatten the curve there at all?
I can tell you from past experience, no.
Okay, and that's
They're
great.
going to be there early to
Okay.
get the meal. And you could stay open 30 minutes, and that's going to be dead time.
Okay,
It's gonna cost you labor.
well, and that's where your experience is really helpful in this.
It's the nature of the group you're talking about. And I'm picking on myself when I say this. If you say lunch is at 12 to 1, they're gonna be there at 10 till, quarter till, and have their seat selected.
Okay,
And that was true the day I showed up. 3/4 of them were already in there 30 minutes prior.
sure,
Because when it was service time, it was by table. They all knew the rules about what table gets up to go eat when. And it's done.
okay.
And they know that at 12:30, that extra food is up for sale.
Yeah, so there's that, there's also, creating, incentives or, policies, carrots and sticks when it comes to carpooling. So like, could you get discount vouchers if you carpool, something like that? Or could you, if you don't carpool and you drive yourself, do you get charged additionally? So, I'm not advocating for any of these, I'm just saying there are a lot of ways to think about how you could incentivize or curb behavior. Another, one that we talked about previously that obviously has been on the mind of, I guess, my staff and then some other staff members is upon review of how, the realization of how many people from outside the township are using our services, we had two thoughts about it. One, I guess I morally feel, and this is I'm in the realm of opinion, right, so just whatever you think about this. I guess I morally feel that the township does have an obligation to take care of our seniors. My moral sense is I don't have any qualms with the township not taking care of not our seniors. Now, there's two ways to go about that. Do I think that you need to like cut off services completely? I don't think so. I think maybe you subsidize them to a less degree, so maybe it's like $8 a meal for non-residents, thus creating incentives to curb behavior. I'm not saying you have to price in the full price of $17 or $19 or whatever it truly is. Another interesting way that you could think about this, which we were talking to some other planners about how they operate their senior centers. And the example I'll go with that I think everyone might be familiar with is the DIA in Detroit. I'll get you there. So when the DIA had a loss of funding, the city during their bankruptcy was looking at selling off the DIA.
Yes, they were.
The three counties, Wayne County, Oakland County, and forget the other county, came together and said,
Macomb.
we're going to fund the DIA as a group effort, and then they'll, people within those counties will have free access to the DIA. So you could even go to some of these other municipalities, and again, the Bath Township could establish a policy that, staff is the board will direct staff, Karen, to approach these other municipalities and say, hey, DeWitt, we are aware that on a weekly basis, we're servicing somewhere around 50 of your seniors a week, serving them meals. We have determined that this is no longer financially feasible for us to continue to subsidize. We would like to give you the option to help us subsidize this. If you so choose to help us subsidize this to the dollar amount of X, then your seniors will remain paying the $5 rate. If you choose not to do so, their rate will be increased at our discretion.
So, just, go ahead, I didn't, go ahead.
I was just thinking about when this discussion makes it to the board where these decisions will ultimately be made. One of the things that I was thinking about is what is the actual cost per meal for a resident in Bath Township? Is there a way to figure that out, what they're actually
There is,
paying,
yeah.
factoring in that it is subsidized through their taxes? Is there a way to figure out what an actual meal really would cost a Bath Township resident versus an out-of-area resident? And I would think we would see that the residents are paying more.
Yeah, of course.
But
because
how
you're
much
subsidizing
more,
their
I
taxes.
think, is what would be needed to help with that
I think if you try to
comparison.
factor in the taxes, then you get into like a
I
whole
mean-
another thing. What's more
yeah.
even is just going by Mark's method
Yeah,
and more accurately just saying, okay, here's a meal cost.
yeah.
Okay,
And then going from there, once you factor in the taxes, it's gonna depend on the property, right? Because
right,
now-
right, I mean, I get all that, but
Think of it this way, that building's going to be there, you're subsidizing that building right now through the taxes. The power, the janitorial, the maintenance, all that's already built, a fixed cost to provide a service for seniors. So you take that out of the discussions of the meals, and that's where I was trying to go, was what's that cost so that you as the board can decide how that should be handled. Again, we made the decision a while ago to change it to above 55 versus a Bath versus DeWitt. And that's a nice thing to do. We have the blue bus that I'm sure is bringing people over here for part of that. But like on, and I'm gonna pick on trash day,
Yeah,
you have to prove that you're a resident to be able to utilize trash day. It's
Bath.
subsidized
yes, for Bath.
for Bath.
I just wanna push back, like,
Okay.
I would take those fixed costs and build it into those meal costs, because if it weren't for the meals, we could reallocate that to like a youth center, right?
Yeah, you could.
And so it is allocated to seniors, and it is allocated to, that benefit, and some proportion of that is allocated just for meals, right? And so,
And again, those are the two pieces that you can
Yeah.
work, because that building isn't 100% because you have to rent it to play cards. So if you wanted it part-time for youth, you could do that,
Yeah.
because it's sitting there not being utilized 100% of the time.
So, but going to your question, Kay, I mean, we're somewhere between 13 at the high end of, subsidized per meal cost and something lower, which
But
depending
again, it
on
goes,
Mark's methodology, might,
Right.
but again, it goes back, the board has to say, we're okay with that, or we need to do something about it. But this is going to be good for the board to have in front of them to make those decisions and understand what that means.
And so, just remember though too, that what the board has originally asked of this body is
Just
Parking.
parking.
recommendations.
Parking.
So yes, they will, well, no, they will ultimately have to make the choice, of course, but they're looking to you guys to make a recommendation. So we provided a lot of data here, but what we're ultimately trying to facilitate is for you guys to get to a recommendation.
So on parking,
On
Well,
park,
on
on park,
parking and issues that
I
have
think that
impact
other
parking, and I
information's going to
think
be
they all
there.
tie together.
yeah.
so just for clarification, the township doesn't get any grants, state or federal grants to offset these costs. These are 100% Bath Township taxpayer funded services.
yep.
Okay.
Minus the admission for
Yeah, the revenue
the,
that's generated.
yeah.
And there was actually some, I will say, there was some ARPA funds that were used for some of the facade upgrades, but you'll notice in my methodology when I came up with the 203K, recently, a metal roof was put on portions, the senior center got all new siding, some new brickwork on, we took all that out. And that's, I think, I wanna say like 15 grand of that was ARPA money, but in total, that was $47,000 of improvements last year that we didn't even include in our operating costs. So we're trying to give them the most favorable argument possible, and these are still the numbers we came up with.
In coming up with $17 per meal cost, to me, that's kind of misleading, because what you're doing, you're saying that the total cost of operating this building is $203,000 minus the $2,000 or so they got rid of something else. So you're saying that $200,000 it costs to keep that building there,
Yes.
but you're applying that total cost to just the meals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
again, we justified that though by saying, and I'm not saying you can justify it or not, you
Yeah.
can think that this is wrong, 100%. We justified by saying this is 92% of all programming occurring is meals. So therefore, we feel like analyzing the meal cost is the best way to make up that. Now, you can say, hey, there are other ways that we could create revenue, and I think that should all be on the table.
Yeah.
And I also think to Mark's point, ultimately, we're not saying, we would never say that we think that seniors should bear the full market cost. And again, my opinion, the township bears some responsibility to look out for its seniors, but to what degree,
What
is I
degree
think what's on the table.
in making sure everybody recognizes what that is.
So I guess what we are going to be looking for from you guys at this point is, it sounds like we have at least one data point we'd like to dial in on a little bit, which obviously staff is open to. But other than that, we want to provide you whatever you guys want in order to get to a recommendation to get this back to the board. And again, I don't think it's gonna be, I don't think maybe even it should be, like, there's no silver bullet here to fix this. The recommendations can be broad, they can be specific, and they can be many, or it might be like, hey, we recommend you do this first, and then you study this later, and then, it can be 5 different things. But what do you guys want in order to get to that place? That's what we're looking for tonight.
So if we have ideas, should we just call you and throw them out there for you to bring to another meeting, or?
Yeah, 100%.
How do you wanna
but
handle that?
We'd like to know how to move forward tonight, if at all possible.
To me, one proposal, long-term, is, again, looking at the campus and the needs in the future to start planning for that, looking at the, and it's part of what Ray and I and Ray Kotke were doing and looking at some of the properties we own to sell them. So maybe property across the street be purchased for future expansion of this campus, to provide services. But again, we're looking to the future, 10, 15 years, to get there. But that's one that I was,
So like a campus master plan
yeah,
is something that you think should be a recommendation.
yeah.
And as far as that building over there is concerned, it seems to me it's very underutilized. Now, we're spending $200,000 for a building that's used how many hours out of the week? Somehow, somebody needs to do some planning, say, okay, how can we use that building better so that 200,000 is used for something?
So like a second recommendation could be, analyze overall building usage and try to, and create
Service.
incentives to use it more evenly throughout the week.
So these are long-term considerations, right? I mean, elephant in the room, I think, is, you know, taxpayer dollars being used to offset the cost for non-residents. You know, in as much as there is, you know, capacity issues, you know, I think, you know, a recommendation that I would feel comfortable with is a recommendation of doing a closer cost analysis of these meals, whether that's, you know, using Mark's expertise or hiring a consultant to nail down what is the actual true cost of per meal, and then the board deliberates on, you know, how much do we offset the cost for Bath residents, and how much do we offset the cost for non-residents?
And then would that give you,
And presumably, if you increase the cost for non-residents, the supply and demand would, you know, down
give you more
adjust.
parking?
Well, down just the demand
Yeah.
for parking, right?
Right.
So just for the purposes of our minutes, so your recommendation's almost two-part. So the first part of your recommendation is either through local staff resources and Mark's resources, or a firm is hired and conduct analysis of the true market cost. The second part is you're recommending the board then use that data to determine at what degree they subsidize these operations.
Yeah.
For non-residential?
I mean, for both. I
Oh,
mean,
for both?
Yeah.
I think, my question would also be, are there any recommendations that are like low-cost, immediate changes that could be made? Like the takeout policy and how that's working. I mean, you had mentioned the hours, and it sounds like that might not be the viable solution, but I think, is there something that could be put into place in the short term?
Like takeout
to
only
s-
parking, like
yeah.
3 spots are dedicated.
Or
right
a-
for takeout only.
Yeah, or takeout is after, or is it before right now that they
It's
pick
right
up
before-
before?
right before lunch is served.
And that sounds like that's when everybody's coming anyway. What if takeout weren't till after? Would that alleviate some of that congestion that's happening where everyone's showing up early, but they're also showing up to get their food during the takeout window? Are there things like that, like low cost, just procedural changes?
We got an expert
that-
right here.
Or
One of
two,
the things I noticed, and Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the people that were eating there ate and
And then
took
took out, well,
meals.
yeah, exactly.
And we don't have a data point to that, but I noticed it was considerable.
How much takeout only do you see? Cause we don't have a data point on that.
I don't.
Mark, what about 2 meals, like 2 separate meal times? How do you think that would work? Cause that would
Again-
that might cut down on some of the takeout purchasing
Yeah.
afterwards and push certain people that buy certain things at 2 different times.
What was interesting in watching it, and it would take more to look at that in particular, because if I'm coming in, the community, which is very strong, of sitting down and having conversations with the people that are there, but then I'm taking a meal to a friend or something. So they're doing that in conjunction. I could not tell you how many meals were walk in and directly exit. Okay? That data point's not here.
There is a huge number of people that come from 11:30 to 12 before they serve the sit-down people that take it out.
And if we could get that count, that would help, because again, they're coming in at 11:30. The other group is showing up about then to come in and take their seats.
Right, and is that what's causing the parking congestion? I mean, ultimately, the senior center asked for this because people are feeling like they don't have enough places or close enough reasonable places to park their cars.
Mark,
And that's what we're really trying to solve in the very short
Yeah,
term.
short term.
what do you think would happen, Mark? And, cause I mean, you do have some, trying to get to something that Kate's talking about, like what's a low hanging fruit? What if the senior center, cause you're saying an issue is, they're taking out, the takeout time is supposed to be 11:30 to 12.
Yeah.
However, the takeout is also getting congested with seat saving. What if the doors for non-takeout, they don't open till noon? Thus disincentivizing seat saving.
I would argue that you're destroying the community.
We have 18 to 20 players who come in at Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the morning to play cards. They come in at 9, they stay through lunch, so you can't really close the door before 12, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
But again, one of the things you're doing is creating a community. And if you were to do what you're doing, you actually would be harming that community.
Fellowship time.
And I totally agree that looking at the cost absolutely needs to be part of the report. But I think the problem that we're trying to solve in the very short term is how could we make parking a little bit easier for these people coming and going? And that isn't necessarily by getting them to stop coming by overcharging them. I don't want to say overcharging, but by, that wasn't, you get my intent though, by increasing, by pricing them out of maybe being able to come as often.
Well, could you have the pickup start before 11:30 to get them in and out quicker?
Not
No,
necessarily.
pickup is not available till 11:45. It's just not. If you don't get in there at 11:30, you're waiting 15 minutes to get your lunch. 15 minutes, it's available at 11:45. That's when lunch is
The
ready.
staff
They're very
that you
efficient.
have, they have to be ready at 11:30 to start prepping the to-go meals for 11:45. And once those folks are taken care of, then they open up basically, so they've got a very
I see what you're.
efficient timing.
I did ask the staff about that, Commissioner Severie, so the problem with that is, I was like, okay, could we do pickup meals at like 11? You know, and get these people like completely away from the other people to get away from congestion. The problem is it's a aspect of food prep that I'm asking questions, I don't know anything about food prep. The meals are all ready at one time. So if you wanted to do something at 11, you in theory could do it, but now the kitchen staff has to have like one set of meals ready to go, and then an hour later have a different set of meals. That's problematic for them.
I mean, production, it's one production. It's all gauged on that 11:30 timeframe.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be though, but it is right now.
Yeah,
But moving away from that, you increase in expense.
Due to the volume, you
Yeah.
can't do
It
that.
seems like, I mean, that's a lot of effort, and logistics.
It's a huge effort.
Whereas bumping the price up $2 per meal for non-residents might solve the issue.
Oh, it's definitely the lowest hanging fruit, I agree.
You got people.
Do you need a motion?
yeah, I think we better open the meeting up if we're gonna continue to.
I move to, allow John to call on public if needed.
Okay, can I get a voice vote on
Yeah.
that?
Did you
Those
get a
in favor?
second? Did you get a
Yeah,
second?
Mark seconded, I think. Can I get a voice vote? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, hearing none, we'll open it up. Judy, I think you were
Thank you
first.
very much.
Will you,
On page 17.
Judy, would you go up to the podium, please? Okay, oh,
There's no mic up
right,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, if you're online. you can't
Well,
hear
you're
them
closer to
anyway.
them,
You'd be on video then anyway.
yeah.
First of all, I wanna thank the staff, Miles and the staff, they've done a phenomenal job. It's interesting, the Senior Services Advisory Board asked the Township Board if a parking feasibility study could be done because we wanna add space to the senior center. Not because it says here there's a preconceived problem with parking. On busy days, we do have a problem with parking, yes, but there aren't that many days when parking is a significant problem. But if you look at the data, you can see almost 50% of the meals that are being prepared are being sent home. And that's because there's no place to sit. If we had additional seating space in the senior center, and we have proposed two things to the township board, an expansion of the building at the back,
I'll get there.
2,000 square feet, or just a small addition where the patio, the porch is, of 200 square feet, so we could do more varieties of activities with all the people that are in the center at that time, or have additional places for people to sit. This is a very in-depth analysis that is fantastic and provides the township with a tremendous amount of information. But I don't want the question that we asked to get lost in some of these issues that you're talking about.
So, I mean, can I?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, if there's a lack of space, right, which is why you want more space.
Could you
But
speak up?
there's a lack of space, and you're not able to serve as many people as you want, which is why you want, that's why there's to-go service, right? One question going back to who served, if 46% of those spaces are taken up by non-residents, it seems to me that, you know, there's one issue, that one way of fixing that is to de-incentivize non-residents to utilize bath services, thereby gaining, you know, upwards of 40% of the seats back.
If you look at the 20 people who come in the morning to play cards, 50% of them don't live in Bath Township. So you're gonna tell them they can't come play cards?
Well, I wouldn't say that, and I can imagine that there is a benefit to residents who can bring friends or family in who may not be residents. And so the issue is to not say, no, you can't, but the issue is, how do we deal with the space that we have, the services that we have, the limited dollars, taxpayer dollars that we have, to best serve, you know, our citizens. And, you know, and it's not a, you know, one size fits all. There can be all sorts of different gradations there. But the question is, can we fix some of this capacity issue with some financial adjustments, you know, bringing those up to date? And also think more long-term in terms of campus space issues.
And I think wiser utilization of the space, making use of the space that is there, that we're paying for Monday through Friday, makes tremendous sense. To just say it's open on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for lunch, and a few activities before or after lunch on those 3 days, makes it more difficult to say that you're effectively using the space that's available to you, to us.
But you also have to cover the cost of the labor to keep it open.
So coming back, if I remember, the board asked us to look at parking.
They did.
Correct.
And we put a lot more into
A
it,
lot,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
okay?
It's
And it's
parking for,
valuable information.
is it parking for the expansion or parking for?
What I think, Judy's saying is, the Senior Center Advisory Board asked the board one thing, but that's not necessarily what the board asked us. And what the
That
board
is
asked
correct.
us was to look at parking, and that's what we've done. It's hard to justify an expansion when you're not meeting the baseline utilization now as the property at, 'cause what I'm saying, I guess, is, yes, if you build more space in there, you will be able to serve more people, but all the other factors that go into serving more people can't be met now. So by building more space, you're exacerbating our current problem, which is the overall campus is not functioning very fluidly during these peak times. by 2,000 more square feet will have more of a spiking effect if none of the other underlying things are addressed. Now, if you address some of the underlying things, then maybe you could get there. And I guess that's what our report's trying to speak to. We can't, I wouldn't in good faith, I think, be okay with just saying like, oh, wait, planning is a breadth of stuff. We talk about all kinds of stuff when we talk about any planning aspect of site design. And so we tried to account for that breadth of factors going on in variables. So that, I guess that's where we were coming from.
I guess the big concern I would have is, if we do add more space, are we just gonna have more people from other communities utilizing our space and costing Bath taxpayers more money?
Cause we're paying for the spaces.
Right, cause we're paying for the spaces. And just as a completely offset is, 3 of my family members, myself was one of the 3, went to Blondie's Barn the other day. We had brunch and it was $47 for the 3 of us, and we didn't have anything outstanding. It was just a normal brunch type lunch, not including the tip.
Yeah, that's another thing that we talked about at the last meeting that is kind of an interesting way to view it, but you do have to account for it. So taking off the planner hat and putting on like an economic development hat, there are competing land uses with this land use that also Blondie's would be one, right? And it's not in Bath, so I don't particularly care about them.
Right. No,
But there's about to be a lunch restaurant on Webster Road.
Yep,
And so our land use, if you think about it from an economic development perspective, we're actually in direct competition with a market rate restaurant that's gonna be in Bath. And the demographic that we pull from is the demographic with the most leisure time. And statistically speaking, obviously everyone has their own income level, but statistically speaking, also has more disposable income than your average American. So I realize a lot of seniors are on fixed incomes, and probably a lot of the seniors that we're servicing probably fit in that category, so a big disclaimer there. But if you think about it from, that's all, you know, it's problematic.
Well, actually 2, because that gas station's gonna have a restaurant in there as well.
And they're primarily looking for, their main is lunch, right?
Right.
Judy, your time's up, technically. Well past time. Cheryl, you had something you wanted to say?
It's also convoluted and all added together, but if we serve 10 meals or we serve 100 meals in a day, to me, one of the things I think about is all the costs except food, which is the minor part of the total cost of $17 a meal, is the same, no matter what. So the more meals you serve, the cheaper they are per meal. The other thing is, I walk in there and most of the time there's nobody to see if I even came in and paid anything, let alone where do I live. That's an issue in itself, because it doesn't happen. I know a lot of you haven't eaten there much, but I have, and tried to understand what I was doing to help them. And that's a true issue. And Meatloaf's the greatest meal, why don't we have it more than once a month? You know, and that just boggles my mind. And I think.
Cheryl, just a second, you said that there isn't always a staff person that monitors whether people come in
No,
and
I would
pay or
say
not?
never.
Is that,
Never when I walk in the door, am I ever asked anything. I walk in and half the time I go pick up my seat and set down my things, and I go, idiot, you didn't pay. That's it, and that's the truth.
So
just be aware.
Cheryl, just there is a staff member there
Yes,
who's
is.
taking
But
money.
she's doing all kinds of other stuff, and she's in there.
They're just
in the
not checking
office,
you at the door.
And there's nobody, right?
Reading.
Yeah, a greeter or
Yeah.
a checker or whatever. So having to prove I live in Bath is like way off the scale of what the way
That's-
things
Yeah,
are.
but it's not currently, there's no impetus to get people to
Exactly,
approve,
but,
right?
and going on from
That's-
there is, Bladensburg doesn't have a senior center. We serve, a lot of people come from Lansbury, I believe. Do it. So, can't we talk to these communities and say, hey, let's bring in some money to we wanna help our folks, we wanna help them, and I think we should want to in every way we can.
That's one of our recommendations.
Yeah, and it's been difficult, and Judy knows the frustration more than I for more years, but it gets so frustrating to get something done. And we should try to do that, and maybe we can contact these other communities and help. Yes, they should help kick in, but rather than an individual, how about the community kicks in? And we've got numbers now, thank you guys.
That could be a
So
voucher
which
system.
communities should
Right,
kick in
yeah.
a little bit more, and be done with it, and let them walk through the door.
Again, to the point, when I walked in there 2-3 weeks ago, wasn't greeted by anybody, I just went to a table, sat down, and realized that there was somebody over in the office, I walked back up there to pay.
Yeah.
Because, again, I
Every
knew,
time, that's been my experience every single time.
the nice part was they sell the tickets to the regulars, but by,
You will see that regulars will identify someone walking in and say, oh, you have to go out and pay Linda.
yeah, they do.
Is
They
there a
were
sign
doing
that
that.
says where the pay window is?
Beg your pardon?
Is there a sign that directs them when they come in the door that says,
No.
No,
there ought to be?
Yeah, I would think
Easy
so.
thing to do.
Sounds to me like we got some management issues.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think that's not here or there for what we're talking about
But I don't
here.
think that's gonna cure
Yeah.
the problem, no.
No, but
No,
No.
it's just a part of it. But
Just
these other
an
communities
operational
should chip
issue.
in, because we shouldn't pay, us that have been paying taxes here 50 years. It's for us, it's for this community, and why not ask them, if you guys are coming here, we'd love to serve you.
Yeah.
Then we need a bigger place perhaps, but more money coming in.
I think,
Thank you,
as we
Cheryl.
get a bigger
Thank you.
place though, we really gotta take a look at what can we, how can that bigger space be used for more than just these
Yes.
meals?
It
I mean-
can be, it just has to be opened, organized, allowed.
Provide the leadership.
Provide the leadership to say, we wanna do it, cause our guys need to live home alone. And when we close, I'm sorry, but there's something I need to bring to this, it's the same subject, but it's not planning. But we closed last summer when we had in Michigan the worst pollution in US history in this area. And we closed for 9 days to clean the floors and fix a refrigerator. Closed the building completely. To our citizens, that was criminal.
Thank you, Cheryl. Please.
So, so in terms of recommendations, I mean, are you comfortable if I sort of cobble together a recommendation?
Sure, go ahead.
So staff, planning staff have pulled together a very nice, set of analyses. One of those is the cost analysis. It sounds like, there's interest in, clarifying that cost analysis, a little bit more. It sounds like with that clarified cost analysis, perhaps, staff could have conversations with neighboring, municipalities about some cost sharing. And also, a consideration of some adjustments of, the charge rates per meals, adjusting that, to be more in aligned with, the true costs. Now, who knows what that will be, but that's for the board to decide, right?
That's
Right.
right.
So, clarify the cost analysis, talk to neighboring municipalities about cost sharing, and also, some, deliberation on, making changes to the fee structure.
Can I just dial down on one of those points with the talking to neighboring communities about cost sharing? I think it would be one thing if this went to the board and they were like, the board was like, okay, we want, staff via,
Right.
Karen, please direct staff to engage in negotiations with these communities, see what they'd be willing to do. In lieu of the board telling Karen to do that, though, like if the planning commission is just telling me to do that, I
No,
think the only
no.
thing I would be able to do would be like,
No,
yeah,
it's
see, I
not
don't
your
even know if
purview,
I'm,
Margaret.
I don't even know if I can do that, you know what I
No,
mean?
Yeah,
no,
Could we,
no,
could
no.
we just see what that number would be before we actually would do anything like that? Cause we would wanna know, like, that's what you're asking for, is what that number might be, right?
I mean,
Wait a minute, can I put you on the spot, Mark?
Sorry.
Would you be willing to work with Miles and staff to create those numbers in an accurate manner so that we can have another fixed point of what our actual costs are?
Yeah, again, I'm more than glad to do that this week, if you have the time.
Yeah.
We'll pick a time and take
Great.
care of that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, when it I agree that we going to other communities and seeing what their willingness to
But-
subsidize this is key, but I think that needs to maybe come from direction from the board.
That's not in our privy, Miles.
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's an administrative issue, and I don't wanna address that.
No,
That's-
John, I agree, like I'm saying,
Yes.
when you
correct.
guys, but you could recommend that
Oh,
to
yes,
the
we
board.
could recommend
You
that
could
to
say,
the
we
board.
think you need to,
That's
we
could be-
recommend engaging with our communities and seeing
Yes.
where cost sharing might be acceptable.
Right,
we
that
would
could be
actu-
one of our recommendations, that's correct,
We would actually have to know what them numbers were before we
Yes.
did that anyways.
correct.
And I like the idea of a campus study, but I can't speak for anyone else on the board, but I think I would have a really hard time setting aside money to expand a facility that's really only used a few hours a day. And
Yeah.
during those hours, yes, it is very busy, but to put an expansion that's gonna sit empty for the majority of time in the
Right.
week seems a low priority compared to some of the other issues that I know that are on the Board of Trustees' plate already for funding.
Yeah,
So I would say let's tailor our recommendations towards maximizing our utilization of the current facility more effectively over expansion.
Okay, so in the short run, we will work with Mark over the next week or so to understand market value. We'll bring that number back to this body at a
Yep.
next meeting
Yep.
with the number and everything else that's already been, presented, and we'll dial in recommendations at that point.
yep. Yep,
what would change based, in terms of recommendations?
Well, you'll have that number, but
Well,
it
yeah.
sounds like you guys are getting a pretty good idea of where your recommendations are
Yeah,
going.
the recommendations, I don't know that are gonna change, but a value will be identified.
It's gonna be
but
above
it's-
5, right?
Yeah, it's
actual
gonna be,
cost.
Yeah.
I believe it's gonna be a little bit over 5.
Well, I think it's gonna be quite a bit over 5,
I don't.
don't you? Food costs have gone up.
Food and
phenomenally.
labor, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Right.
labor.
okay, maybe it would be worthwhile for us
Yeah.
to see the methodology
Yeah.
along with it,
Yeah,
that's.
yeah, I would like to see the actual methodology and actual cost.
We'll type it out in the same way that we did this.
But, you know, getting that's, in my opinion, a sales point.
Yeah,
But the recommendation, continues on the line that you had. We need to look at all of these for the board to move forward on things. We provide the information, recommendation, and they choose where
Exactly.
they spend the money.
right, we're an advisory body,
Yeah.
yep,
So two methodologies of addressing parking. One is reducing demand.
yep,
And through.
Or identifying.
Less subsidization of non-residents' meals.
right,
Or partnering with neighboring communities to offset our costs, on a per meal basis, or, if we maintain the current trajectory with the increases, the expansion of the senior center, which.
But I don't
maybe-
see how that takes away demand.
Yeah, but at
What-
least it gives you the revenue to be able to, justify expansions to facilities in the future, where it's hard to justify it now.
But if you increase your cost for those that are not Bath,
Sure, but if the other townships are
if they,
footing the bill,
Yeah.
then the individual user notices no difference.
Yeah, but what I
It
was
makes
saying
no
about
change.
being able to justify, cause now it's like, okay, you couldn't justify it before, cause utilization was bad and they're non-township residents, but now that stopgap has been made up, now you have additional revenue streams coming in, maybe you can justify some expansions.
I mean, in an ideal world, I mean, if there was a productive conversation, it could be down the route of perhaps we have satellite kitchens, or each community has their own setup, and we collaborate on, you know, cost sharing, you know, scales of economy and the like. Thereby, all residents in the neighboring communities are, you know, have easy local access to food.
But, yeah, but, and I think that is an ideal world, but DeWitt Township might be, okay, we have no interest in operating a senior center, however, you are correct. A lot of our seniors are utilizing your services, so yeah, we do find this a valuable endeavor. We'll put $10,000 in our budget for next year.
Now, can I add one more thing to the, I mean, I know we're not making recommendations, but, you know, some of the information about the lack of data, and being associated with staffing and some management, I think that's actionable, in as much as that became discoverable in this deliberation. And I would recommend, if anything, you know, an audit of staffing to clean up data collection processes as well as other, you know.
Good point. Yep. Well, the other thing that concerns me, and I maybe shouldn't bring this up, but if you look at the Census Bureau statistics of the number of people in Bath that are over 55, and even if you wanna break it down to 65, there's a pretty small percentage of those people that are actually utilizing the senior center.
For sure.
Now, I don't know why, but it seems to me as though we're looking at a pretty small percentage of the population.
Definitely. Alright, well,
Thank you.
yeah,
Excellent job,
I
Miles,
think,
by the way.
yeah, I think we got our
You and your
marching orders.
staff.
Mark will be in touch, and I appreciate it.
All right, let's move on. And get my paperwork together here. New business, do we have any new business, Miles?
No.
None? Okay, do you wanna give us a report?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I'll try to keep it brief because we've been here a while. The RFP for the comprehensive plan has been sent out. We sent it out to a number of consulting firms that operate, kind of all throughout the state, from Grand Rapids to Detroit to Flint.
Good.
So, all over. We're expecting to get those turned in by, March 24th. At which point we'll call on the chair and probably the vice chair to help us review the applications. And eventually with myself and the chair and the vice chair, we might end up whittling it down to probably like the top 2 or something, and then they might even, top 3, however you guys wanna do it. And, bring them in front of the planning commission to get the this body's sense of who they wanna go with for this process. And probably make a recommendation, I would assume, along
Yep.
with that. We had some meetings over the last week with some of the consulting firms that just wanted to schedule a Zoom meeting to dive in on, what we're looking for, get more information. We tried to relay via RFP and in the meetings we had that we want this to be a comprehensive process. That we wanna look at everything from our current zoning to our future zoning to our land use policy and come up with actionable steps. We are required via the grant that is funding all this there needs to be calls in the plan, there has to be a specific section about housing. That's a requirement of our grant, so just keep that in mind. If you're wondering why there's a chapter about housing, that's why we have to do it for the $50,000.
Yep.
So everyone seems excited, I'm excited, it's gonna be a good year for that. In terms of other things going on in the department, well, I felt like over the last month, we were able to get a significant amount of things kinda checked off that we've been wanting to do for a while, one of which is we've been recently in touch with Consumers Energy, and I've spoken to Commissioner Almareggi about this. Right now, we're in the very early stages of understanding kind of the overhead wiring situation in the township, and just kind of one of those side projects that wouldn't necessarily come in front of the planning commission, but affects the built environment, so we're trying to understand how that's playing out in Bath. We've had some conversations with a number of developers, nothing's been submitted officially, but we have one developer that's looking to maybe do a multifamily development kinda in the pocket of the Saginaw 69 area. The 40-unit one that the councilors presented is, they're working with, I believe, their legal counsel and their engineer to figure out other options. They have expressed that they would like to move forward and come back with something, so we're kinda waiting to see what they do there. We're also talking to our legal counsel just to make sure that we're reviewing everything the right way and double checking on some of the things that were brought to light in the meeting, which I think we all concur that all those issues have to be addressed before we feel comfortable bringing it back to you guys. So just to let you guys know, we're getting like a independent third party review of it, which is probably needed in this case, given my experience personally with condos, which is my lack of experience with condos. And so it's a learning curve for me as well, and I think it's important for me to be upfront about that. And then, what else has been going on over the last little bit? I think those are really the main things. We're always on the lookout for more grants. We're waiting to hear, oh yeah, this is a big one, I guess. We're waiting to hear back from the $250,000 sub-grant that we applied for with LEAP, for the MEDC money for corridor improvements to the Webster Road project. There will be more information to come, I believe, this Friday about the timeline of the Webster Road project. We can expect a heavy amount of construction to take place in spring in the village area, Bath, as it relates to sidewalks, but along the Webster Road corridor itself. We're wrapping up design. That's another thing I've been talking to consumers about lighting design. A part of our project has always been some lighting in the low spots for safety reasons. And then there continues to be negotiations at this point playing out with the Chandler Road project. Short recap, in 2019, I believe $12 million was requested from the state. In 2024, $10 million was awarded. Obviously, that's $2 million less plus inflation.
Yeah.
There's about $4 million short gap in funding. That funding can come from the township, it can come from the road commission, or it could come from scaling back the project. I think all three options are on the table at this point, but basically township staff and the road commission staff are now going back to the state so they can mediate whose money is whose. So a little bit of a tense negotiation going on there. I have no idea how that will play out and don't have anything to report, but it's per the course. This is normal, this is how it goes.
It's politics.
So no big deal there.
Miles, just a quick question about Chandler. I got a notice for a public hearing at Hawk Hollow for the highway.
Oh yeah.
On off-ramp. Is that integrated with that project, or is that a completely separate?
It is not, and I've heard so much conflicting stuff, I almost don't even wanna bring it up, because I've heard people, credible sources, saying, next 10 years, this thing's a go. I've also heard credible sources that would know, saying, this is never gonna happen. So I don't know what to believe.
So who's hosting?
Tri-County.
Tri-County
okay.
via, a request from MDOT to perform it, so. I don't have much to add, it's just like all speculation at this point, but yeah, there have been some conversations and public hearings about an off-ramp on the Chandler Road, from 69. Yeah, so that, the Webster Road and the Chandler Road alone have been incredibly time consuming.
I'm sure.
So is Webster Road actually gonna start this summer?
It's starting,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we'll get the timeline on Friday, so I don't wanna speak out of term, but right now, I believe as soon as March 31st, you'll see a large mobilization.
They've been moving poles.
We've already started to relocate poles, so, yeah.
Are they gonna flatten out that up and down anymore?
Nope, we won't mess with the elevation, that it is gonna get another course on it.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, we need the site distance, would be nice to have.
Yes,
I
it
was
would.
told a little bit will come off that hill,
Sure would be nice, take some more off top
as
of
they
that.
go south, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an improvement from what was there, but it's
Oh,
not, you
yeah,
know,
it's not perfect.
it's not perfect.
Most
So
things
for the
aren't.
safe routes to school sidewalks, I know there was some discussion about where they were gonna put sidewalks in front of the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Did they make adjustments to,
Yeah, I believe the current, I don't wanna again speak out of turn there, but I believe they're gonna end up having, because of the slope here, it was problematic. So
Yep.
it's gonna come up at an angle in order to address that slope, and then across here, and then up, and then another cross, and then up this side of the street.
so 110 foot on the, west side of the street, Walnut?
Yeah,
Okay.
on the west side of Walnut. It was this part that was problematic, cause you can't just come like this, like you typically would, cause the slope's way too high, so we had to come in at a 45. So, got a little bit funky. Another area that will be interesting, just sidebar, is this area here.
Yep,
It's so
certainly
wet.
will.
So it'd be some shoring and maybe even some retaining wall, a small retaining wall there. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting project, everyone's really excited. And big shout out, I mean, if you guys don't know, I mean, Commissioner Almarigi, when he was on the board, was huge in
Yeah.
coordinating a lot of that.
I got it started. Chris Hagerman really took that project
Yes,
forward
yeah,
along with
yeah.
township staff.
Yep. Yep. You wanna tell us anything about the class you took today, or?
Oh, yeah, I was trying to keep it, the class today, was 3 points on the class, took a class about, site plan review. We have, and everyone should go to these classes, there were some commissioners there, I'm gonna try to get you guys a book from the class so you guys can see what they're talking about. In terms of our barriers to entry for site plans, we're better in some ways from the development perspective, and we're worse in other ways, so it's trade-offs again. In terms of process, our process is a little bit more thorough than what, is typical from other communities, it seems like. But I feel like there's benefits in the way we conduct our process, which is we identify the red flags early on, which is where I think where they should be identified. And that helps us cut down on projects dying administratively later and thus wasting our time in the review process. So even though it's a little bit more thorough than what I've seen from other communities, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. As long as Bath Township is in high demand, which it is and will be for the foreseeable future. Now, if Bath Township starts to be in lower demand and people don't wanna live or develop here, then you have to curtail your process to incentivize more people to do business in your municipality.
Another way to look at that is, for a developer, we tell him up front, these are the problems, before he spends a ton of money.
Yeah, that's why I'm
Absolutely.
saying, yeah, I think looking at a lot of these aspects of site design early on are beneficial to us and the developer, so I don't recommend any major changes there. As far as our ordinance goes, compared to some of the other townships, and I'm talking charter townships that do zoning, not just, you know, your Victor townships.
Right.
But our ordinance is in good shape. I mean, we call out what's a minor amendment, what's a major amendment. We call out what our standards are. Our ordinance is a little bit more built out than your typical charter township. But we're a little bit bigger than your typical charter township as well, so makes sense.
Anything else?
That's it, thank you.
Anybody got any comments they would like to share with us? George?
No, it's just not about that.
Oh, what did I miss?
You missed
Voting
trustees.
trustees, oh, I'm sorry, Kate. I'm always doing that, aren't I?
Sorry.
Didn't mean to, sorry.
No
Thank you,
worries.
George.
I knew we'd get to it. Just to kind of recap and fill you guys in on what's been happening at the board level recently, since we met last in the middle of February, the Board of Trustees held a special meeting on February 24th for the purpose of introducing the candidate that the hiring committee had selected for police chief. As part of the hiring and interview committee, I will say that I was extremely impressed with the caliber of candidate that applied for the chief position, for Bath Township. There was a wide range of experience. Other chiefs applied, candidates who had been through FBI training, candidates from large municipalities, candidates from small municipalities, candidates from near, and candidates from far. I was really, I wasn't quite expecting that, and I think that that was refreshing for me to see how much interest there was in highly qualified people applying to become chief of police in Bath Township. I think that that really speaks highly of our police department and the individuals that we have working there, that so many qualified, highly qualified people were interested in coming to lead that. So I just wanted to share that. Ultimately, the hiring committee decided to select the current lieutenant here in Bath, Matt Mardigan, and I guess promote him to chief. It seemed like that ultimately was going to be the best fit for the department moving forward. Then we met again. And just a few highlights from our meeting last week. The superintendent also gave a project update, which we're pretty familiar with a lot of the things that are already going on. There was the introduction of a committee assessment plan by Supervisor Fewens Bliss that he is, I don't know, starting the process of assessing the boards and committees that we have here in the township and looking at if restructuring is necessary, and if so, how that would play out. We also had quite a lengthy discussion about Mercy Ambulance, who provides ambulance service to Bath Township currently, free of charge. The township does not pay anything for Mercy Ambulance, and their system of billing insurance for responding to a call and then taking somebody to the hospital or providing treatment, the reimbursement through insurance is not covering their costs. So they're looking at requesting some contracts and some fees from Bath Township, DeWitt Township, and City of DeWitt, I believe, were the three that were included in that. I think the county had, but those were the three closest ones. So there's quite a lengthy discussion about that and that process, and
They're going to quit, I guess, if they don't get.
right, it's a financial issue. It's it sounds like it's something that's gonna need to happen. But it was also made very clear to us that starting our own ambulance service would be much more expensive than entering into a contract with what Mercy currently is providing. That I think is the main highlights, unless anybody has any questions about anything.
I don't think so. Not
We
for
missed
me.
public comment. Could I make this right now?
Oh,
Sure.
Oh, okay.
As long as it's 3 minutes,
We
Cheryl.
slid by it.
Would
Just
you please
quickly,
go to the podium?
That's
Just
next,
a
public
quick
comment.
question I had on the
No, I know
parking
it's
lot.
not, but
It is.
Seeing the parking lot and that, the fourplex behind it would be safer for kids, safer for everybody. I understand the water runoff issue, but there's some new products out that are completely permeable that you could maybe possibly look into that as an alternative to get them off the street and avoid all this hassle and have a permeable, small parking lot in the back where there's lots of room? Just a question.
thank you, Cheryl. Commissioner comments? Everybody's gonna be quiet.
I do. I
Go ahead,
again want
George,
to thank
please.
those that are behind the scenes. I know Miles and his department spent a lot of time on this senior center, and there's a lot of positive comments, especially from the pros, which was greatly appreciated to hear. And so I thank your staff that works there and those that work here in the office with you that get us ready for our meetings. And I thank you for that.
Anything else?
No, I think that report for the parking, I think it was a good report.
I think so too. I
Had
think
a
it's
lot
very
of
good.
stuff in it.
Yep. I think it's great that we've got such a diversity of skill set and experience on the planning commission. And I appreciate the board of trustees' support for that, because it's been a challenge sometimes. That's about the only thing I got. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None? Hearing none, we're adjourned.
Severie, second by Mark.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Sherry, if you have 1 second.
I like the way you do it.